গুড মর্নিং। আচ্ছা স্যার, আমি পুরো প্রোগ্রামটা একটু রেকর্ড করতে যাচ্ছি। গুড মর্নিং। Want to take your permission to record the program so that our students can get. Do you agree with me to record this program, sir?
Yes.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, sir. গোপাল, তুমি রেকর্ডিংটা শুরু করে দাও। গোপাল।
হ্যাঁ স্যার, আমি স্টার্ট করে দিচ্ছি স্যার।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
তখন দা একটু ওয়েট করো, রেকর্ডিংটা 1-2 মিনিট টাইম লাগবে স্টার্ট।
হ্যাঁ, আমি ওই জন্য ওয়েট করছি। আমি দেখছি ওটা এখনো শুরু হয়নি।
We should proceed in bilingual manner. Okay. Bilingual.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. We should proceed in bilingual manner because our students will understand or more comfortable with Bengali, but we have to go through English also. Yes.
We have started.
Now the program is being recorded. A very good morning to all of you. Professor Santosh Kumar Pal, my teacher, guide, and academic guardian. My pronoun to you, sir. Professor Satyajit Saha, the inaugurator of this program, Dean Science. Welcome you, sir. Professor Raghavendra Pratap Singh, Jawaharlal University. A very heartiest welcome you, sir. Professor Debnarayan Modak. Sir, you are also welcomed to our virtual platform to discuss on the matter. And the other professors from various departments, various universities and colleges who have joined here, the scholars, the students, and the other gentlemen or women. I cordially welcome you all to this virtual meet to discuss on a burning issue, that is the contemporary Indian society, pre-modern, modern, or post-modern. Our two renowned speakers, Professor Debnarayan Modak and Professor R.P. Singh, will throw light on this matter, and Professor Santosh Kumar Pal will moderate the program after giving a short introduction on the theme. We all know that we are in a modern society. We demand it that we are in a modern society. But the question of modernity is there throughout the life. Whether we are modern or pre-modern in our mental state or in our infrastructural state, the problem is always with us. You have your different perspective, might have your different perspective, but we have to judge ourselves in which position we are there in our society. And today, our respected speakers will discuss on the matter. With these few words, I invite Professor Satyajit Saha, Dean Science, Vidyasagar University, to inaugurate this program. Sir, Sir, please.
Good morning to everyone. Firstly, it is my great pleasure to be associated with the one-day international webinar on contemporary Indian society, pre-modern, modern, postmodern. I like to thank our honorable VC Professor Sibaji Pratim Basu, for his constant encouragement to organize the webinars regularly. I like to thank Professor Tapan Kumar Dey, Dean of Arts, Vidyasagar University, and Vidyasagar University Philosophy Alumni Association for inviting me on this occasion. I like to welcome Professor R.P. Singh of Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Debnarayan Modak of Netaji Subhas Open University, Professor Santosh Kumar of Burdwan University. I also welcome all the participants and faculties present here. As we know, our society is changing very fast, and if I take this time period, not going to very beyond to a very long back, if I just compare just 20 to 25 years back, 30 years back, with that respect, our society is changing very fast. During my childhood, actually, I used to see the peoples were interacting more and more, the neighbors, and were interacting more and more with others, and we could solve many problems by interacting with each other. But now, as we know, as we are more approaching, as we have got the modern society, we have got the social network there in the every aspect. Now, I think the peoples are now being a little bit isolated. So, in this respect, I like to. I think this today's seminar, that is webinar, sorry. This webinar would be a very interesting to see how the picture would be in the future. So our distinguished speakers are here to speak about our Indian society. So I will not. We are all eagerly waiting to listen from our distinguished speakers. So I will not take much time. So may I now declare the national webinar on contemporary Indian society as open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for inaugurating this national webinar with some beautiful words. Professor P. Mishra is not able to join in this program as he is not well, and I think our registrar, Dr. Jayanta Kishore Nondi, is also not able to join. So we will enter into the program directly. Now I request Professor Santosh Kumar Pal, Burdwan University, to throw light on the theme of the webinar and also to moderate the program. Sir, please.
Thank you, Tapan. First, I express my thankfulness and best wishes to the organizers of this webinar on contemporary Indian society, pre-modern, modern, or post-modern. That is to Vidyasagar University Philosophy Alumni Association, the organizer. I welcome to our respected invited speakers of this program, Professor R.P. Singh from JNU, Professor Debnarayan Modak with the Netaji Subhas Open University, and all the retired teachers of Vidyasagar University also. Two renowned speakers of this seminar, of this webinar, our colleagues from different universities and colleges, my students, and alumni of the Department of Philosophy, Vidyasagar University, and also some other guest participants are also there. I heartily welcome you all. On the host part, I appreciate Professor Satyajit Saha's generosity for being with us, my one-time colleague, Professor of Physics and now Dean, Faculty of Science, Vidyasagar University. And our respected Professor Prof. Misro, he was my colleague, but he could not join due to physical illness. He is actually the founder teacher of this department. Anyhow, I express also my thankfulness to Professor Kumar, Professor of Philosophy and now Dean, Faculty of Arts and Commerce, and Secretary of Vidyasagar University Philosophy Alumni Association, the other office bearers of this alumni, and all members present here, and also thank those who did not turn up due to some preoccupations, but always help in carrying out the legacy of this department and the university as a whole. My cordial thanks, good wishes, and respects to you all. Let me start with an anecdote. I was listening to Professor R.P. Singh speaking on postmodernism in a Saturday seminar, of course online, organized by BHU's Philosophy and Religion Department on 16th April this year. In the question and answer session, I raised a query to him. How would you characterize contemporary Indian society? Sir replied, I will be speaking on this complex issue in another webinar, if you can organize. This webinar is actually the fulfillment of that, my cherished dream. And it is being organized by our students. Actually, I was also there at Vidyasagar University. This was my first appointment. Then I came to Burdwan University. So there are many students who are also my students. And I got my first assignment of teaching at the PG level at this university. Professor Kumar, who has been my direct student here, and also at the University of Burdwan, where I am teaching now and present, and he is also the present Dean of Arts. Besides being a professor of philosophy, he has been more instrumental in organizing, along with other office bearers of this alumni of Department of Philosophy with the Vidyasagar University. On the theme of this webinar, I am not very equipped to say many things, for which we all are waiting for our invited speaker, Professor R.P. Singh from JNU and Professor Modak, my one-time colleague, Professor of Political Science. And still, as the idea of holding such a webinar first came to my mind, so some preliminary ideas of mine may be shared with you all. And as a moderator, I am expected to say a few words on this theme. One line of thinking nowadays we sometimes face in our academic world, particularly India, and that is the categories of pre-modernity, modernity or post-modernity, etc. are Western or European terminology, and these un-Indian clamors have nothing to do with us. Along with it, our obsessions with our past, which culminates in the rhetoric that in our Vedas everything is there. We need no advice from anyone else's. The Vedic age of ancient India is often considered as the heroic age of ancient modern civilization. Ancient civilization, which cannot be said that is pre-modern. That was also some type of modernity was also there. And still we are in search of Ram Raj. What does it actually mean? We can take it as meaning good governance, separating it from the twist of theocracy. Then it is meaningful. And too much obsession with the past that we now see in some groups of people can lead to the re-advocacy of Monobati Bornogab system and inhuman casteism and anti-Shudra stance. And its draconian patriarchy. So there are some issues which need to be addressed at this juncture. How we see our past and how these categories will be dealt with. Western ideas and cultures like the liberal notion of individual liberty, democracy, obligations, etc., how you see all these things. Pandit Dindayal Upadhyay cautions us, we modernize but do not westernize. But my problem is that we welcome Western science and technology, which has its base in some specific ideology. How can we separate the result from its narratives? Will small narratives of postmodernism do? Arguably, we are to be free ourselves from all the clutches of intellectual colonization. But can you get an exemption from the rest of the world and say, as Bharatbasi, we do not need your modernity, not your postmodernity idea either? Can we survive then as one citizen, or like to become Vishwaguru? We like it or not, we are now in a globalized world. And sometimes we say we are in a single moral community. We cannot avoid these category questions. As an academic, how can I then teach philosophy, particularly Western philosophy, without referring to this categorization? And also as a post-colonial subject, how can we avoid all these? And strongly with today's webinar, I strongly believe that today's webinar will throw some light on this conundrum. For our young audience, particularly our PG students and scholars in particular, and some of our students in colleges, let me introduce the terminology first so that they can follow our expert speakers more easily. As modernity or modernism is the central point of reference, let me find some marker for this. Modernity is both a historical periodization and the ensemble of particular socio-cultural and ideological norms, attitudes, practices that arose in the wake of the Renaissance, in the age of reason in the 17th century, and in the 18th century Enlightenment. Some commentators consider the era of modernity to have ended as early as 1930. I do not share this view. Some others say it is in 1945. But the most responsible periodization is that it may be said in the 1968 onwards, that postmodernism has begun. It has become more vocal after the collapse of Soviet Union in early 1990s. We have found Francis Fukuyama declaring the end of history and the last man. That is, he referring to mankind's ideological evolution had come to an end with the end of Cold War, with the return of liberal bourgeois democracy, and we have no other option to practice. Thematically, modernity is associated with the individual subjectivity and autonomy, scientific explanation, and rationalization, along with a decline in emphasis on religion and teleological worldviews, which was the main marker of pre-modernity. The emergence of bureaucracy, rapid urbanization, and accelerated financial exchange and communications. Modernity prioritized its ideal of autonomy, rationality, science, and freedom. In case of India, that were imposed on us through the British colonialism, and later with constitutional provisions aimed at promoting Indian nationalism, industrialization, and particularly secularism. So we can say universalism, reason, science, progress, and some type of holistic attitude was there in modernity. And sometimes it is called meta-narrative. I'll be speaking on that later on. The term pre-modern covers a number of different societal forms: hunter-gatherer, agrarian, horticultural, pastoral, and non-industrial. Now such society has virtually disappeared, although there are still in existence in some of the today's societies also. Of course, some people seem to go back to those days, consciously or unconsciously or deceptively. Pre-modernists see the world as a totality of a unified purpose. The human being is seen as part of the whole, which is greater than its parts. They strive for progress, keeping faith in religious creeds, but without taking into account the process of historical developments. At that period, any political ideology was imbued with religion, and apostasy, that is the abandonment or renunciation of such religious political belief, was a crime. In the progress of some dimensions of modernity, that is science and technology, industrialization, capitalism, administrative power, military power, into the international division of labor, world capitalist economy, nation-state system, and all other things, we can be said as a marker of modernity. And postmodernism is not coherent body of knowledge, as you all know. Jean Baudrillard, Gilles Deleuze, Jacques Derrida, Michael Foucault, Pierre Félix Guattari, Frederick Jameson, Emmanuel Levinas, Jean-François Lyotard, Richard Rorty, Slavoj Žižek, and there are so many thinkers which can be regarded as postmodern, post-colonial, and post-structuralist, etc. Now come to Francis Francois Lyotard. He is writing the book in 1979, The Postmodern Conditions, to identify some marker for postmodernity. He has said many things. Actually, he is speaking in terms of fragmentation, deconstruction, absence of closure, and going beyond meta-narrative, etc. Knowledge can be considered to be a type of commodity he is speaking of, because it empowers people. Knowledge empowers people, so it is also a commodity. Knowledge is communicated through narratives. He was distrustful of any grand narrative which claimed to have access to absolute truth, whether that be in the shape of culture, religion, politics, economics, fashion, anything. He also felt that these grand narratives usurped small local narratives, and this was to the detriment of society, as will dismiss and wash away small truths in the face of these grand narratives, which hold truth for smaller social groups, and a better way to discuss the world and how it works through small groups telling mini narratives, hold truth for them. In the day of social media, when everyone is a consumer, commentator, reviewer, citizen, journalist, the world is now a melange of mini narratives communicated, advertised, proliferate by social media and constant updates, reports, status, etc. So the grand narratives have a very finite life ahead of them, and they are actually against such type of grand narrative. I'll be speaking in Bengali also after that. And the main challenge is how to modify the so-called grand narratives to include these moral truths and the mini narratives. Actually, modernity has an idea that some type of holistic ideas, an umbrella concept is there, umbrella scheme of thought, in which almost all the aspects of life are taken into account. And they were of the thinking that everything will be determined by our some type of universalizability, some type of normativity, which includes all human beings of all society. And that particular stance, that is the stance of meta-narrative, has been insensitive in some cases. And that is the place from which postmodernism comes into being. There is some issues that you are not taking account of all the mini narratives, and you are actually under the same umbrella concept. And the three postmodern, actually, the main challenge is how to modify the so-called grand narratives to include these moral truths. Some are there who are totally rejecting the modernity and speaking that everything will be in the mini narrative, and there will be no great or no holistic idea. I do not share that view. To my view, modernity will continue, and the questions that the postmodern has raised, we have to address all the issues, and so that the modernity can be an adequate equipment to for the human society, to our knowledge production, etc. There are three central postmodernist idea I can raise, that is death of author, the death of history, and the death of metaphysics. Any grand narrative gets the questions. Universality, objectivity, pure rationality get challenged. But we keep in mind that all these may culminate in post-truth. If you do not take any meta-narrative, any umbrella concept, any umbrella conceptual scheme, then you will stumble on what we call nowadays called post-truths. Thus, we find that in some respects, modernism is problematic or deficient. But be equally aware that postmodernism has promised us nothing greater. Not modernism versus postmodernism, but postmodernism's continuation with the dialectical modernism. Perhaps what we in the present Indians need instead a great dose of enlightenment of the human subject as capable of choice, rational behavior, and world-modifying action, seeing what are going on in the name of religion and authority nowadays. If Europe suffers from an excess of history, it is a commonplace that India is the most ahistorical civilization in the world. So says Professor Markan Paranjape, Professor of English in JNU, writes, no significant intellectual or philosophical contribution is possible if you do not radically question received dogmas from both our own traditions and from the West simultaneously. Postmodernism thus offers India a mixed bag of ideas. We do not seek some ultimate idea of progress or grand nationalistic design, but from a commitment to my immediate survival and empowerment as a post-colonial subject. We need to face postmodernity as well, but also with caution. When we speak of our earlier days, that is in our ancient civilization, there are many things which can never be denied as these are pre-modern, so all these are to be rejected. But still, when you take those earlier civilization, we should keep in mind that there has been a lack of scientific understanding, some sort of, and we could not relate it to the continuation of the scientific investigation in the rest of the world, and that is what called, and the question of casteism, patriarchy, superstition, scarcity, deprivation. So we have taken help of the modernity of enlightenment, and we cannot deny it. But how to relate our present societal situation with all these things? I'll be referring to Edward Sweet, who is saying that, speaks of Orientalism. He says that the West has seen us in some other way, and we should think ourselves in our own terms, and that is also very important. But still, if you take the subaltern stance only, there will be some type of problem, and some critics of subaltern studies are saying that the present-day crisis of India in terms of collapse of secular values, etc., they are referring to this type of postmodern or subaltern studies. So with these few words, I'll wait for our speakers to enlighten all this issue. আমাদের ছাত্রদের জন্য বলি যে এখানে মডার্নিটি তিনটে শব্দ আছে, মডার্নিটি, প্রি মডার্নিটি আর পোস্ট মডার্নিটি। মডার্নিটি যেহেতু সেন্ট্রাল কনসেপ্ট, তাই এখানে কতগুলো কনসেপ্ট আমি একটু বলছি যেগুলোকে আমরা মডার্নিটির ক্রাইটেরিয়া হিসেবে দেখি। যেমন এক ধরনের ইউনিভার্সালাইজেবিলিটি, যে আমি যেটা করবো সেটা যেন সবার জন্য গ্রহণযোগ্য হয়। আমরা কান্ট্রির কথা জানি যে আমি যাই করবো সেটা যেন ইউনিভার্সালাইজেবল হয়, তাহলে ইউনিভার্সালিটির একটা কম্পোনেন্ট মডার্নিটির মধ্যে আছে। এর সঙ্গে আছে র্যাশনালিটি, যেটা র্যাশনাল, যেটা রিজন ডিমান্ড করে আমরা সেটার উপর বেশি গুরুত্ব দেবো। আবেগ অনুভূতি বা নিজস্ব পছন্দ অপছন্দকে আমরা একটু পাশে সরিয়ে রাখবো। আমরা নিশ্চয়ই তার সঙ্গে অ্যাডজাস্ট করবো, কিন্তু সম্পূর্ণভাবে তার দ্বারা আমরা চলে যাবো না, তাহলে আমরা রিলেটিভিজমের মধ্যে পড়বো। তাহলে সাম টাইপ অফ ইউনিভার্সালাইজেবিলিটি, অবজেক্টিভিটি, অ্যান্ড অলসো সায়েন্সকে আমরা ছেড়ে দিতে পারি না। সায়েন্সের অনেক প্রবলেম থাকতে পারে, সায়েন্সের ক্ষেত্রে আমরা অনেক কার্সেস, কিছু অভিশাপের কথা আমরা বলি, কিন্তু সেগুলো আমরা সায়েন্স কিভাবে ব্যবহার করছি তার উপর ডিপেন্ড করে। বিজ্ঞানকে ছেড়ে দিলে কিন্তু আমরা কিন্তু আরো মহাসাগরে পড়ব। আর প্রি মডার্ন কি বলতে চাইছি? প্রি মডার্ন বলতে চাইছি যে বিজ্ঞান যুক্তির এই যে আধিপত্য আমি বলতে পারি, আমরা যেটাকে মডার্নিটি বলি, তার আগের অবস্থা, যেটা মূলত ধর্ম এবং এক ধরনের পুরনো কালচার, এক ধরনের প্রকৃতিবাদী দৃষ্টিভঙ্গি থেকে জগৎটা চলতো এবং সেভাবে ভাবা হতো। সেখানে কিন্তু অথরিটির কথাই কিন্তু শেষ ছিল, এবং সেখানে বিভিন্ন ধরনের অধিজাগতিক বা অতিজাগতিক ঘটনাক্রমের সঙ্গে জগৎকে ব্যাখ্যা করা হতো, এবং সেটা আজকের যুগে কিন্তু আমরা সবসময় সেটাকে আমরা মানতে পারছি না। আমাদের অনেক বর্তমানের সঙ্গে আমার যুক্ত করতে পারছে না অনেক এলিমেন্ট। কিন্তু একই সঙ্গে আমার যেটা বক্তব্য ছিল, প্রি মডার্ন বলে কিন্তু আমরা অতীতকে বাদ দিতে পারি না। দ্যাট ইজ দ্য মোস্ট ইম্পর্টেন্ট পয়েন্ট। মডার্নিটি যে আইডিয়া, সেই আইডিয়াগুলোর মধ্যে কিন্তু আমাদের ভারতীয় প্রাচীন সংস্কৃতির মধ্যে অনেক আইডিয়া ছিল, যেগুলো কিন্তু এই মডার্নিটিকে অ্যাকচুয়ালি রিফ্লেক্ট করে। বসুধৈব কুটুম্বকম, এই আইডিয়াটা আপনি নিশ্চয়ই প্রি মডার্ন বলে বাদ করতে পারেন না। কিন্তু যখন আমি এটাকে রিলেট করতে চাইবো এবং এই সূত্র ধরে আমি কিছু কিছু ধর্মের অপব্যাখ্যা করব, এক ধরনের আইডিওলজি ডেভেলপ করব, দিয়ে আমরা মাঝে মধ্যে সেই রামরাজ্যের কথা বলবো, যার যার উদ্দেশ্যটা কি আমরা আজকে আমাদের কাছে সকলের কাছে মানে পরিষ্কার হয়ে গেছে যে রামরাজ্যের যে অর্থ, যদি আমি বলি যে গুড গভর্নেন্স, সুশাসন, সুশাসন কিন্তু কি সেটা সামনে আসছে নাকি অন্য কিছু সামনে আসছে। সো অল দিস থিংস, এই ব্যাপারগুলো গুরুত্ব দিয়ে ভাবতে হবে। আরেকটা কথা, পোস্ট মডার্নিজম নিয়ে একটু কথা বলি, যে পোস্ট মডার্নিস্ট এসে কি করছে, তারা বলছে মডার্নিজমের মধ্যে কিছু ডেফিসিয়েন্সি আছে, কিছু ল্যাকুনা আছে, এক ধরনের রিডাকশনিজম আছে। এই রিডাকশনিজমটাকে অ্যাভয়েড করতে হবে। যেমন আমি যদি মার্ক্সবাদের কথা বলি, মার্ক্সবাদকে আমরা এনলাইটেনমেন্টের একটা প্রোডাক্ট হিসেবে নিতে পারি এবং সেটা অবশ্যই লিবারেল যে ট্র্যাডিশন তারই আরেকটা ব্যাখ্যা, যেখানে লিবারেল একটা ট্র্যাডিশন পুঁজিকেই মনে করছে শেষ কথা, ক্যাপিটাল ইজ দ্য লাস্ট ওয়ার্ড। এখানে উনি বলছেন, মার্ক্স শুধু এই কথাটাই সেখানে যোগ করতে চাইছেন, না পুঁজি লাস্ট কথা নয়, অ্যাকচুয়ালি ক্লাস স্ট্রাগল ইজ দ্য লাস্ট ওয়ার্ড। সো একই ট্র্যাডিশনের মধ্যে কথা বলছেন, কিন্তু যখন আমরা এই আইডিয়াসগুলোকে আমরা প্রত্যেকটা আমাদের জীবনে প্রত্যেকটা ক্ষেত্রে প্রয়োগ করতে যাচ্ছি, অনেক সময় সেগুলো অ্যাপ্লিকেবল হচ্ছে না, এবং সেখানে অনেক সময় মনে হচ্ছে এই যে আমব্রেলা কনসেপ্টগুলো সব জায়গায় প্রযোজ্য হচ্ছে না, এবং তার ফলে কিছু সমস্যা দেখা দিচ্ছে। সেই সমস্যাগুলোকে কেন্দ্র করে অনেকেই এই মডার্নিটিকে পুরোপুরি বাদ দিতে বলছেন এবং একদম পুরো জায়গায় ফিরে যেতে চাইছেন, যেখানে বলা হচ্ছে গণেশের মুখের আদলের ব্যাখ্যা নতুন ভাবে করা হচ্ছে। হ্যাঁ, আমরা কি তাহলে সেই মনুবাদের মধ্যে যে ভাবনাগুলো আছে, ব্রাহ্মণ্যবাদের যে ভাবনা রয়েছে, নারীর উপরে যেভাবে বলা হয়েছে, এই বিষয়গুলো যেভাবে আছে আমরা কি সেভাবে মানবো, নাকি তার মধ্যে যেটুকু পজিটিভ আছে সেটুকু নেব, যেটা নেগেটিভ সেটাকে বাদ? এখানেও আমার একটা প্রশ্ন, যে একটা আইডিওলজির একটা পার্টকে নেব আর একটা পার্টকে বাদ দেব, এই জায়গাটাও আমার কাছে খুব প্রবলেমেটিক মনে হয়। সেজন্য আমি আশা করব, I expect from our speakers to highlight on this issue. With these few words, I end up with my thematic note. Thank you very much.
স্যারকে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ স্যার, many many thanks to you. You have just throws the ball on the ground, and I think that speakers will address all these questions you have raised. Now I start the session with Mike, our moderator, sir, Professor Santosh Kumar. Sir, please, according to Professor R.P. Singh, will deliver his lecture first. Sir, please.
Okay. Now I welcome Professor R.P. Singh, Professor of Philosophy at the Center for Philosophy, Jawaharlal Nehru University. We are very thankful to have you with us. And actually, JNU to us is a dream world, and we sometimes feel something differently with JNU. And so I have got you, and we are very thankful to you. And Professor Singh has his interest in different areas of philosophy, both Indian and Western. He is specialized in German idealism, post-modernity, consciousness studies, ethics, both applied and practical and theoretical, civilization and cultural studies, in the Vedic Upanishadic culture, Vedanta, Buddhism, human rights, multiculturalism, it's the most important topic nowadays, globalization, philosophy of globalization, philosophy of education, etc. And as per the methodological perspective, he is well equipped with dialectics, skepticism, foundationalism, etc., and also hermeneutics. Professor Singh has an experience of more than 31 years teaching, 1999 from at JNU and up to onwards. And earlier he has been somewhere in some colleges or university, I do not know. And he has different awards and honors. That is twice awarded Man of the Year, 2001 and 2004 by American Biographical Institute, USA. Marquis Who's Who in the World, 2009 for valuable contribution in the field of education. 100 outstanding intellectuals of the 21st century by International Biographical Center, Cambridge. International Plato Award by International Biographical Center, Cambridge. and many international collaboration consultancy, Center for Indic Studies, USA. And Professor Singh has supervised PhD thesis and MPhil dissertation, 38 PhD students as per our record in the website, and 22 MPhil have already been awarded. Besides, a number of PhD and MPhil scholars are pursuing their research work under him, and there have been 6 postdoctoral scholars. 5 of them have completed the work, 1 is still working. And to his credit, Professor Singh has more or less 16 books, publications of 170 articles in different national and international journals, 7 in USA, 2 in France, 2 in Russian, and 4 in UK. This may be deficient because I take all these from the website. Twice chairperson of the Center of Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal University in 2007 and 2009, and also in charge of different centers of the university. And to mention some of the relevant writings, there are so many writings, it is not possible to read all these things. For today's seminar, I have taken some paper, that is 2008, Consciousness, Indian and Western Perspective, Reason, Dialectic and Postmodern Philosophy, Indian and Western Perspectives, Philosophy, Modern and Postmodern, and Western Education, Indian Variant and Gandhian Alternative, Civilization, Nostalgia and Utopia, and Journal of Indian Council of Philosophical Research. This is actually some of the important publications which are relevant to this talk. With these few words, I like to request Professor Singh sir to start his lecture. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, and very good morning to everyone. I hope I am audible in a...
Yes, you're audible, sir.
Okay. First of all, I congratulate you and your team to have thought of organizing this national webinar on contemporary Indian society, pre-modern, modern, and post-modern. And the topic which I have chosen to speak is traditions in India, European modernity, and post-modern predicament. So at the outset, I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor, and I'm told that he is all the time, encouraging such events to take place in the university, Professor Shivaji Pratim Basu, and the Dean who just inaugurated the seminar, Professor Satyajit Saha. So I thank you very much, Mr. Dean, and Professor
Debnarayan Modak.
Debnarayan Modak is the other speaker from Burdwan University, and I remember my own external examiner, Professor S.P. Banerjee, Shankari Prasad Banerjee. He was the Vice Chancellor that time in 85.
In Burdwan University, yes.
Burdwan University. So in 85, I was awarded PhD degree, and he was my external examiner.
Oh, that's
that time, yeah. So, and he was also quite often used to visit our center in the university, and so I'm happy to see that a person from Burdwan University has also joined and is going to speak with me. And Professor Tapan Kumar Das, who has been the director of this event and has been telephoning me, emailing me and everything. So thank you very much, Professor Tapan Dev. And it's indeed a great pleasure to work with you. And Professor Santosh Kumar Pal, the moderator. So I very fondly remember the question you had raised during my BHU lecture. And it's good that you thought of, organizing one event on specifically on this issue, that contemporary India, how do we look at it? That is pre-modern, modern, or post-modern. And our CV is actually, I sent it in the morning today. Last night I was busy somewhere. So, but anyway, it's okay. It can be managed. CV doesn't matter. So far, we know each other very fondly. So let me just put my ideas, place it before you. First thing is that what is India? and for that matter, what is contemporary? So, how does what is India differs from what is Europe or what is USA? So these are very normative questions. What are the norms which are predominantly there in these hemispheres of India and Europe and USA? More so, what is modern and if we can include the contemporary issues also within modernity, though contemporary is something more up to date compared to modern. So, but we can take them together. So what is modern differs from what is traditional, both in the Indian sense of the term and also in the West. Then what is it to be modern, and how is it different from the tradition? Third thing is that what is postmodern, and in what sense does it differ from what is modernity? And Professor Santosh has already placed the issues in a very lucid manner. And then some philosophers like Jean-François Lyotard, he says that post-modernity is a rewriting of modernity. Then how far this approximation is true? This is also one of the questions which I'll be addressing. And there are various normative issues and questions which will keep on coming before us, and around which, with the help of those normative questions, I would like to answer these issues. So let me go in a chronological manner. Suppose I go from, like this: tradition, modernity, contemporary world, and postmodern. The way periodization has taken place, there may be some logical sequence also, very important one. There may be certain themes which are running all across, from tradition to modernity and to post-modernity, including contemporary issues. So, and there may be some new things which have come up, and certain things must have been repudiated also. So let me proceed in this manner. So whenever we talk about a particular tradition, what does it mean? A tradition, generally, it comprises of beliefs and attitudes of the people which are extended through time. That means there is a temporality involved in the ideas which existed in the tradition. Now, which existed through time, in which certain fundamental agreements are defined and redefined in terms of both internal and external debates, issues, questions, and everything else. So that means traditions have been interacting continuously within the tradition itself and outside other traditions. So there is inter-traditional debate and there is intra-traditional debate. So debate and argument and questions are something which keep the traditions alive and also help them to move ahead. Now, questioning as an inquiring act in a particular tradition is basically a kind of a system of understanding and interpretation, dissemination. So whenever the question of interpretation comes, we are always, equal with postmodern, temperament. So interpretation, dissemination, and attempt to find out the hidden meanings of a text, because the original author and the original audience, they all have died, and a new audience has come up. So the questioning is something which opens up all these issues. Now, while questioning, there are certain things which we take them as with certain ideas which are hierarchical in nature, maybe for the mainstream and the subaltern, majority and the minority, and the literate and the illiterate, dominant and under domination, very many ways when power interferes into it with economic and political issues, then it becomes hierarchical. There are also certain perennial issues, certain issues which will sustain all through. And then sometimes, it may be historical, sometimes there is no historicity prevailing into it, and it becomes, many times it becomes otherworldly also. So this is very complex kind of phenomenon. And in Indian tradition, we can say that the Purusartha, Yoga, Asrama, Varna Vyavastha, these are all the traditional, conceptual frames which we are having it, from the several thousands of years back. Now, some of the features which are very uniquely Indian in nature and which it took for the West many centuries to understand, to incorporate. One such issue is that truth is one, but wise people call it differently. That means Ekam Sat Vipraha Bhautavadam, the Rigvedic inscription. So, this plurality aspect, it came to the West very late, in the late 19th century, it comes up. Before that, they thought that plurality is some kind of relativism and it is not philosophically correct. But in the 19th century, they were told that, look, even if philosophically you cannot defend plurality, plurality is reality, is a reality, it is there in the society, and philosophy has to address it. So it comes in the late 19th century. Another thing, that let noble thoughts come to us from everywhere. That means Ano Bhadra Kritavo Yantu Veshpa. Let the noble thought comes. We can understand the Samhitas which have been compiled, collected and arranged. All the noble thoughts are there because it's kind of compilation. And of course then there is Mimamsa, the analysis aspect of it, so that what is living can be incorporated. So this is what it is. But plurality has developed in very many ways in India. If we look at Indian philosophy particularly, there we find that there is a way to go from one to many. This could be one way of addressing plurality. Like in Vedanta it happens. So from ultimate reality is one, but it can be manifested in many ways. Then there is that from many to many, if we take up Sankhya, Vaisesik and Nyaya, there are many substances and there are many more which are coming up. Then we take up from many to one, particularly in the Bhakti Vedanta, Nimbarg and others, that Krishna is many, but then he is one also. And finally, from nothing to many, which we find even in Buddhism, Subhas Sunyata. But there are many manifestations of it. This is one aspect of it. The other thing is that, in India we have 4 religions which are indigenous: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism. There are 4 religions which came from outside, that is Judaism, Jewish religion, Christianity, Zoroastrianism and Islam. So it came from outside. There are certain religions which are like diaspora, like Tibetan Buddhism, Baha'i faith and others. So there has been, a kind of, continuous sense of, contact, conflict and confluence. So Indian tradition can be defined in terms of contact, conflict and confluence. In very many ways there have been many conflicts also, but it is the confluence, overcoming of the conflict that prevailed therein. Since this area is very vast, so I will like to narrow it down and come to the focused issue of what is pre-modern India and what could be understood as the modern India. Now, in the pre-modern India, that means from before 1857 mutiny, that is generally termed as the pre-modern India. So during that period of time, even before the Britishers came to India, so there was, Akbar, who had already created some kind of an atmosphere where cultural barriers started getting broken in India. So with his philosophy of Deen Ilahi, then and all kinds of taxes, tax exemptions and everything else, and recognizing the plurality of Indian society, so we find that the cultural barriers had started getting broken. But when Britishers came to India, then we find that India got divided into 4 regions. That is Mysore, Maharashtra, Awadh and Bengal. And in these four reasons, we find that some kind of a sentiment started emerging gradually. That was the sentiment of patriotism, very substantially, and which helped a lot for India to move towards modern society. So this was a patriotism which was very sensitive sentiment, and it was related to the language, to the land, to the caste, Desh, Vatan, Nadu. There are many factors which are there into it. When Britishers came to India, then the traditional patriotism, it started developing some kind of indigenous criticism.
Please mute yourself. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So this started, developing some kind of indigenous critiques in India, but the Britishers, they were already trying to map out, because the first thing which they did in India is to have a survey of India, that what are the things which are available in India, and they made some kind of yard of 18 feet long and kind of thing. They started measuring the land, the flora and fauna, the cultural, the languages barriers, from Kanyakumari to the Himalayas. So they started measuring everything, surveying everything. Survey was the fundamental thing they did, so that they can extract or facilitate the drainage of economy from India during the colonization period. So they also developed the railways, the postal services, and this was a new public sphere which came up. The railways and the post offices and means of communication, even the roads were also updated so that transportation can take place, and a new public sphere started emerging during this period of time. Also, because Britishers came with advanced technology, advanced administration, and advanced weapons with themselves, so the patriotic elements in India, they started developing certain criticism that this is not the good way of governing India. So there was a questioning of it. It all started. But 1857 mutiny is the landmark period of India entering into modernity. So in the sense that new institutions like universities started coming up, Kolkata University, Madras University, Mumbai University. I think it was in 1858 or 59 Kolkata University came up, and then in a few years' time Madras University, then Mumbai University, later on Allahabad University, Lucknow University also came up. Just 2-3 years back, I think 3 or 4 years back, we had, or maybe in 1920 we had celebrated the 100th year of Lucknow University. This was, new institutions, educational institutions started coming up for education, training and everything else. Now, in Indian modernity, 1857 onwards, we find several intellectuals who had come up and they had started playing their roles in redefining India in a certain term, and also in what way we can appropriate the West and how far we can retain our tradition also along with that. Because in the West, when modernity came, it was a fight against the tradition. They repudiated the religion. Prof. Santosh has already outlined these issues, that to be modern is something entirely different from what is there in the tradition in the Western sense of the term. But in India, traditions continue, because tradition is not all the time dead. There are living traditions which are there. So we find most of the philosophers, Radha Mohan Roy, Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, and Lokmanya Tilak, and Gandhi, Ambedkar, they were all trying to understand India in terms of indigenous values, and also the ideas which had developed in the West during Enlightenment. That is late 18th century in Europe, or so that time, maybe 19th century. So 1783, 84 kind of a thing where enlightenment was very much flourishing there. So late 18th century kind of period. So I'll come to those, some of those issues, not much of it, because my thinking is focused only on India today. So I'll go to the Western philosophy, but very little about it. So we find that contemporary Indian philosophers, modern Indian philosophers, and that includes even the contemporary Indian philosophers also, they were aware of what is happening there in the West. They knew what is Western philosophy, and some of the Western philosophers were also taught in the universities, Kant and Bergson, Hegel. They were taught in the universities in India also, and Tilak, in fact, in his book Gita Rahasya, he has extensively quoted, so many philosophers, from the Greek philosophy to German, French, and British philosophers also are there, and that is there. And Vivekananda also knew a lot about Western philosophy, and Tagore, Sri Aurobindo, in fact, he has done a lot of work, particularly his book Foundations of Indian Culture is something very important text, and in defense of Indian culture and civilization. So that is also very important. But he knew the Western philosophy, and they also knew that what are the, wrong impressions which most of those philosophers are having, like James Mill and William Archer, including Marx also, 1953 to 1956. So in his letters, he had already given a lot of descriptions about India and about the mutiny in India and everything else. It was there. And even some of the philosophers like Immanuel Kant, he also knew about Indian philosophy. In his book Perpetual Peace, which Kant wrote in 1795, and there are certain articles, the third definitive article which Kant has written in the book Perpetual Peace, and in the footnote, he has developed the Vedantin and the Buddhist and Upanishadic ideas. Particularly the concept of Om has been explained by him in a much detailed manner, contrasting it from other such notions which are there in the West, from Greek philosophy and also the modern philosophers who are having there. Hegel, in fact, there was Friedrich von Humboldt. He had given 5 lectures on Bhagavad Gita, and those lectures have been retranslated by Herbert Herring, and ICPR has published it in 1995. The book was published by ICPR. Bhagavad Gita, an episode of Mahabharata by Friedrich von Humboldt. Hegel had reviewed these lectures. In 1825, he had given these lectures at the University of Berlin. And Schelling was aware of it. Schopenhauer was, very much aware of it. Nietzsche was aware of it. So we find that whole lot of philosophers in the West, they were aware of Indian philosophy, and Indian intellectuals were also aware of what is happening in the West. So this was a remarkable development during contemporary India. It was very challenging and a period of testing the ideas, new ideas which are coming from the West, like human rights, like secularism, toleration, justice, citizenship, constitutionalism. These are the wonderful ideas which came up during Enlightenment period in Europe, and these can be thought that these ideas traveled to India also, along with the movement of their economic force to India. So we find that Indian intellectuals, they started looking for some kind of indigenous terminologies about it. And some of those issues I have put very specifically therein. Let me just put 2 more issues before you from the Indian tradition. If we look at the Upanishads in Indian tradition, then we find that Upanishads are exploratory in nature. Vedas are like storehouse, which has everything. But it looks like a jungle, forest. So what will you do? You need to organize it. It's just like a storehouse where everything is there, but you need to organize it. So for organization, we go to exploration of ideas in the Upanishadic phase. So various ideas about the Pramanas, about the metaphysical entity of Brahman and Atman, about the ethical issues of Vyuta and Nishreyas, Purusharthas, they have been there. Even the meaning aspect, Mimamsa kind of a thing, and hermeneutic aspect, that is also there. So everything is there in the Upanishads. Now the second stage is what is called, in the process of organizing Indian intellectual tradition, is the Sutra period, from Jaimini to Badarayana. So this Sutra period is a compilation of period. So compiling different viewpoints, but putting them all together. Compiling in a systematic manner. So there is exploration in the Upanishad. There is compilation at the Sutra period. Then we have the Bhashya. In the Bhashya we have the comparison. So many interpretations are possible, many ways to look at it. This is one way of organizing Indian tradition. The other thing is that what kind of method do you adopt when you are trying to organize it? That method could be the way it is done in the West, that chronology should be there, that there is a date, place and causality. Chronological could be there, or it could be purely something which is called normative or thematic or conceptual. There are many issues which are just conceptual in nature that can be explicated to organize it. So this is a very tedious process, and many intellectuals have done on it. Now I come to again the original question, what is India? And that is first war of independence. So as I had said, that Indian modernity started in the fight against colonialism, British imperialism, and they were not accepting the norms and the principles and the laws which the Britishers had floated, and there was a systematic way of opposing it. But while opposing it, they had an alternative normative structure also. That may not be consistently so structured, but it was very functional in nature. It was working, like dharma is something which works. It may not be structured very systematically, but it works pretty well. Now in this kind of formulation, what is important is that how do you place the notion of time, temporality, historicity, whether you regard the ideas as historical in nature, confined to a particular period, or that these ideas are something which are eternally there, that there is a perenniality and they continue, that Indian tradition has the continuity in nature. So Britishers used to say that, look, this is a very old tradition. So how do you propose that it is still continuing? So Indian intellectuals were spending a lot of time and energy on showing that it continues. They also said that the so-called social contract theory, which defines Europe in a very substantive manner, is basically in Indian tradition, very wrongly formulated. Because here in Indian tradition, we develop a kind of contract in which the self creates its own image. So we go to the schools, and during the school period, we create an image, self-image in the schools. Then we go to the institutions, maybe family, maybe some kind of institution which is established there. There also we create our own self-image, kind of a thing. When modernity came up, then we find that there were certain institutions where people go and create their self-image against their original nature. This happened when people started working in the factories, where there is no discrimination of any kind. So they found that it is some kind of, going against one's own image also. This became a problematic in India. So even it was manifested during mutiny time also, that the गाय का मांस इस्तेमाल किया गया, and some beef is used there, all that stuff came up. That goes against the self-image of it. Now here in India it happens that, look, in the West people have become individual, but in India we have a shared history, and in the shared history then we find that people live in the community. Particularly, I remember one incident which Professor S.P. Banerjee had told me after my PhD Viva was over, and then we had gone for a dinner at India International Center, and there he shared one kind of a small story that in 1950, when he was offered a job of lecturership at Calcutta University, then perhaps Kalidas Babu was there, or some, I don't remember it. So he asked him that we have two scales, 200 rupees per month and 225 rupees per month. Which one would you like to have? He said, obviously 225 rupees. Then he said, any academic reason for that? Because you haven't done any substantive work at this stage. And to claim this kind of a thing, you give some academic reason. Then Kalidas Babu said that, look, in our Bengal, if a person gets a job, that means the whole family has got a job. So it's community feeling, it's a family kind of a thing. It's that kind of an image, not individuals, the way it happens in the West, that you get the job, only you go there. So individualism is questioned here in Indian tradition during this period of time. Then in the West, generally it happens that they understand the society only in terms of its economy, its development, and its history. But in India, it's the civilizational society, and it has economy is something which is shared by everybody in the society. We may not have the surplus, but we are complete. It's called pura, kind of a thing. A village is called a pura. That means it is perfect, it is complete. It may not have enough surplus, but it is complete in a way. So it's a different kind of a notion which was there. Generally, people also had proposed in Indian tradition that we are cosmocentric, not anthropocentric. The way it happens in the West, that they are anthropocentric, the Jewish and the Christian, Judeo-Christian tradition, that God created man and placed him at the center of the universe. But in India, it becomes cosmocentric. We are part of the cosmos, of the ritas, and everything else, of the nature and everything else. Britishers used to say that, look, this is a very solipsistic kind of an idea, cosmocentric idea. You just think of it, and it is nothing but an empty thing. So, but there are various answers to all these questions. So there are almost 4 such pairs of ideas which came up as a very challenging during contemporary India. So from the West, the concept of equality came, but in India we had the hierarchy. The border system was hierarchical in nature, culture was hierarchical in nature, but in the West we find that there is some kind of equality which was prevailing there. So how to reconcile hierarchy with equality? This was a very big challenge. Second thing is that in Indian tradition was very much collective in nature, but from the West, individualism came up. So how to reconcile the collective with the individual? That was a very big problem. The third thing is that the transcendental world, something which is suprasensible, and this worldly secularism, the empirical life in which we are living. So these are the couple of issues which came up as a very challenging kind of a thing for them. A number of philosophers have worked on it, and we find that in 1817 there was a book written by James Mill, The History of India in 3 volumes. And he took up Hindu period, Muslim period, and the British period to understand it. Just 1 year later, 1818, Philosophy of the Hindus, T.S. Goldberg, he wrote about it. Then Humboldt's lectures on 1825 on Bhagavad Gita. Then 1857, Marx's writing on India, including the Eastern question. Some of the questions he had raised in letters, from 1853 to 1856 period. And then in 1857, mutiny took place. So Karl Marx used to write substantially on India under the, because that time he was the correspondent of New York Daily Tribune, London correspondent of New York Daily Tribune. And he used to write one column on India for almost 6 years. Continuously he was contributing about India. So that is there. And William Archer's in 1918, he wrote about is India civilized? So various texts which came up in a very substantive manner. Now, Indian modernity was, one of the basic features of it is that nationalism which came up in India during modernity. It was not there in the pre-modern society. So nationalism, when it came up, then in what way does Indian nationalism differ from what is there in the West? For instance, how does Hitler's nationalism differ from what Gandhi had? So for Hitler, and for that matter any other Western intellectual, for them nationalism means looking for an enemy within the society itself. So Hitler looked at the Jews as the mortal enemy of the Aryans. Same case happened in Spain, in Italy, even in Germany, in France, in UK also. The Irish and the British kind of a thing. Looking enemies within the society itself. But Gandhi did not believe in this way. For Gandhi, nationalism means wiping the tears of everybody. Because in India, nationalism started developing against its fight against British imperialism. So it was not looking for an enemy, rather trying to take everybody who are suffering from this imperialist force. This is one aspect of it. The other aspect is that India as a national identity and India as a civilizational identity. These are two big differences. So as a national identity, it becomes very narrowed ones. In fact, Rabindranath Tagore was all the time against national identity because he thought that some kind of international is something much better. So Gandhi had a different view on it. Sri Aurobindo had a different view on it. Vivekananda also had, Ambedkar also had a different kind of a take on it. So civilizational identity, so in which we find that plurality comes and national identity is some kind of homogenizing effort. So the pre-modern, if I should say, pre-modern India was very much communitarian, and modern India becomes individualistic, or even it was trying to create some kind of challenge to individualism. Pluralism is some kind of, not a philosophical problem, it is a social issue, and it has to be addressed socially. So it is this kind of a situation in which we are placed. Now, European modernity, when it came to India, we find that there came substantive change in India, both in terms of its economy, politics, cultural issues, and everything else. They got a different kind of interpretation altogether. One such feature came up during this period of time that people thought that India is an imagination of the West. This is very provocative kind of a statement, but they thought that what is the USA, for instance? The 4 pillars of the White House were all constructed in Europe only. Pillars like judiciary, free press, democracy, humanism, secularism, All these are the pillars of the White House. But these are the concepts which were constructed in Europe. And with economic force from Europe, these ideas went to USA, to Latin American countries, to India and Africa, and at very many places. So we can say that the ideas of democracy, human rights, justice, secularism, tolerance, etc., this is the way that Europe tried to have an imagination of whole of India. And this started, unfolding itself in a very substantive manner gradually. If we look at what is European modernity, I think Professor Santosh Kumar has already discussed this issue at length, that it started during the 17th century. Particularly, there was a debate between Cardinal Bellarmine and Galileo, in which Galileo was defeated. But we all think that Galileo was right, though he was defeated. But we are the heirs of Galileo. And after 450 years later, in 1993, Vatican Church also publicly apologized to Galileo and his family, the kind of suffering which was given. So 1633 was the defining feature of the emergence of modernity in Europe, where reason replaced revelation or religion. Science replaced religion, science versus that kind of a thing. And individualism started coming up during this period of time. In fact, I have got around 12 such features of European modernity, but some of them which are relevant to India can be taken up for consideration. There was one issue which was raised about the periodization of it. So, in fact, Arnold Toynbee, he wrote around 11 volumes on history of mankind, humanity, on what is history, a study of history. So, in the volume 1, page 1, he says that modern period of history comes to an end during 1850 to 1875. So during 1850 to 1875, that was the period when India becomes modern. And in Europe, modernity comes to a crisis during that period of time. So because during that period of time, we have Schopenhauer, we have Mill, we have Marx, we have Nietzsche. So they lived in the same period, but they never came in touch with one another. Marx was a critic of capitalism. Mill was a supporter of capitalism. Nietzsche had a different way of looking at it. Schopenhauer at another. So various viewpoints started coming up. So plurality started emerging. It is this plurality which was already prevailing in Indian society, right from its tradition itself. It started coming to Europe during late 19th century, from 1850. And they say that though post-modernity comes very late in principle, but it was in the making for a long time, perhaps from 1850 to 1875 onwards. It started getting in the process of making. But substantially it comes up with number of philosophers, both Derrida, Lyotard, and many Richard Rorty, many philosophers who are there, many critical theorist schools which are also associated with 1922 onwards. So these things started emerging. Some people take it up during the period of the two world wars. That means from 1919 to 1940 period, post-modernity started coming up. Others take up when there was a crisis in European universities in the late 60s, 1960s. So it comes up. So, but this is a contested issue. Various positions are there in that. But plurality, when it started emerging, and then even the West started taking support from India, that Indian society is pluralistic, but they are managing the society in a nice manner. Though, of course, Marx said in his letter, in his article in the New York Daily Tribune in 1857, that Indian society is so fragmented that it is bound to be ruled either by the Britishers or by the Germans or by the Russians. So that was a very wrong impression which Marx had about India, that plurality could also become unity at the moment. Gandhi made use of it during the period of nationalism in India, during freedom movement. It was made use of in a very substantive manner. I think I'm running out of time also, so I'll be very quickly doing the job, very fast. So on modernity, so we take a post-modernity as some kind of a nostalgia. It's a mood, some kind of an attitude which we develop to understand the reality. It's not an ism kind of a thing which Professor Santosh has also pointed out. It's not a systematic way of looking at it. It's a way of looking in terms of its plurality, in terms of its conflictual nature, in which reality follows diverse models. And all these things started happening in India during 1970 onwards. We find that after emergency in India, 1975 onwards, 1975, we find that regional movements started coming up very substantially.
Yes.
The first time coalition government was formed with the help of the regional parties and everything. Tribal movements started coming up. Dalit movement started coming up very substantially. So marginalized sections, they started coming up in a very substantive manner. So even gender movement, race theories were also coming up very substantially during this period. These are the key markers of postmodern, the role which media played very substantially in shaping the ideas in the West and also in India. The incredulity of the grand narratives like Enlightenment, like Hegel's pan-logism or Marx's proletarian revolution, which was questioned by the West, and in India also they were looking for such most general narratives as something which is very suspicious. So as India, in fact, the various narratives which started coming up, it was already there in Indian society. The West started understanding, their problematics in terms of Indian ethos and everything else. So I have 2 more slides and then I'll stop. So there are many things to talk about it. So one is that what could be the postmodern attitudes in contemporary India? So some of the features which I would like to place for your consideration. First thing is that identity has been an issue very substantially there in the modernity, but to have multiple identity and also including national identity, that means some kind of a unified identity, is some kind of very unique phenomenon of the postmodern attitudes in India. So you have the plurality and also you have a national identity kind of a thing, very substantially there. So since in India, contemporary India basically was anti-colonial struggle was there, which was inclusive in India. It was not in the West people were very exclusive there in the West, nation became above the people. Political questions were not above the people. They were for the people. They were with the people, kind of a thing. There is solidarity with the people and with other nationalisms also. Gandhi used to say that we have a solidarity with African National Congress also. We have solidarity with other such movements which are happening anywhere else in the world. So including minority rights, the marginalized, the subalterns and everything. So nation was not above the people. It was about the people, and as I had said, that wiping the tears of everybody. Democracy, human rights, equality, justice, and secularism
Yes, sir.
indigenous interpretation. In terms terminology is available in India. So 19th century established in India a middle class which became very rebellion. They were the one who were actively participating in the national movements and struggle for movements and everything else. So regional and tribal movements also started coming up during 1970s onwards. So a kind of, pluralistic society started participating very substantially. Now the last slide. That what are the hopes, challenges to Indian modernity? So particularly the contemporary India. So what are the hopes and challenges which we have before us? So some issues are very nostalgic in nature, and some of the issues which are very utopian in nature. Utopia in the positive sense of the term, that utopia means the hope, because if education can also be taken up as utopia because it creates a hope in the people. So the post-colonial India, which is constitutional, citizenship, human rights, justice, it developed during bipolar world, but during the period of two ideologies, the bourgeois ideology and the socialist ideologies. But then it took up all the good things so that India can become a developing society and create some kind of a revolutionary spirit. So Indian Constitution is also a kind of, I feel, and I can speak at length on it, that this is also a postmodern text, because Indian Constitution is a text of interpretation only. What do the judges do? They do an interpretation of the Constitution only. And if there is some vagueness, inexactness, then these matters are referred back to the parliament to rectify it so that it can be properly interpreted and communicated effectively to the people. And this is what the postmodern attitude has given to us, giving an interpretation of it. Pluralistic interpretation, not a kind of commandment kind of a. This is also very important issue, and
Sir, are you? We cannot hear you, sir.
About it, because during late 80s when arts-seeking events started taking. Do you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Please conclude your time.
Yeah. So post-Soviet era, that becomes multipolar world, and India also has a say and share into it. And you can see even in today's world also, when war is going on between Russia and Ukraine, India has a major role to play into about it. So the new millennium in which we are there, the virtual world, the multipolar world, and they all require some kind of utopian in nature and hope for the best in the future. Thank you very much, everybody. I have exceeded the time, but the theme was such a huge one, and that's why I had avoided of speaking on it during my BHU lecture. So thank you very much to everybody, Professor Kapande and Professor Ashok and everybody else.
Thank you very much, sir. We are enriched with your lectures, and you have covered almost all the aspects of modernity and with reference to India. And we have different types of queries and questions will be there. But we like to have our second speakers to speak first. Then we will come to the questioning. I will request our participant to note down their queries in the chat box, and that will be helpful to us to organize the question hour session. Without killing much more time, I shall request our second speaker, Professor Debnarayan Modak sir, to deliver his lecture. Devnanda, are you here? Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I just 1 minute. Now our speakers, Professor Debnarayan Modak, He is actually director of School of Social Sciences, Netaji Subhas Open University. He retired from there. But earlier he was in the Department of Political Science, Vidyasagar University, for 1990 to 2010. And he needs to introduction. He has written so much, and particularly for the Bengali people. And it is very interesting that none of our colleagues have taken pains to write the different types of things for our students who are in their own language. And he has done a lot on that issue. He has completed two UGC research projects. He has many books, at about 20 books I can mention. Among them, five edited books, 150 plus papers, and there are so many edited volumes also. But I'll not take time on that. Actually, I'll just mention 2 or 3 books or writings of her that will be relevant to this talk. That is Rajniti o Bharat Bhavna Vividha Prasanga, different issues, and contemporary issues in politics, India and beyond. And there are also Uttar Upniveshik Bharatiya Ganatantra, understanding civil society's puzzle, feminism and politics, Bharatiya Rajniti te Sampradayikata, communalism in Indian politics, Samata o Samajik Nyay, Apratik Bharat Sangram Sangharshaman Rajniti. So actually that's how. So very little. He has written so many, and he has edited so many books, edited volumes, and articles. So these are some of the things I mentioned that relevant towards to this issue. So without more time, I request Debnarayan, my friend, philosopher and guide in political philosophy, you can say. So please start it.
Good afternoon, everybody. At the very outset, let me extend my heartfelt thanks to the organizers. Actually, I feel myself at home when invited for any program at Vidyasagar University, because I spent about 18 years in teaching at this great institution, I must say. Personally, I'm very much acquainted with many of the veterans there. Even Professor Santosh, he is a very good friend of mine. Upon the key person in organizing this seminar, is very near and dear one to me. So, without wasting much time in mentioning the names of different persons present here, I extend my heartfelt thanks to each and everybody present here. First of all, let me say that I am very much afraid to deal with the topic, as it is not only a very delicate and controversial one, but also for its multifaceted, multidimensional, and multidisciplinary, at least interdisciplinary nature. However, I have given the consent to deal with it, keeping in mind the certain focus of the very theme. I personally prefer to raise so many questions relating to the topic rather than attempting to answer those. Because as I have already said that it is a very problematic topic, and I myself do not consider myself as very efficient to answer those questions. However, I like to address the topic in my own way. The moot question, as I found it, how do we view Indian society? How can we designate contemporary Indian society? Is it proper to label it either as pre-modern, modern, or post-modern? I think this is the moot question placed here for discussion. Naturally, before going into any kind of deliberation on Indian society, it is proper to give ourselves some time in the present context to understand the very implications of the terms pre-modern, post-modern, and post-modern. In this connection, let me say that I am fortunate enough that the speakers today, learned speakers today who spoke on the theme, have already dealt with such complicated task. I need not repeat all those things. What I can do is to bank upon their deliberations and mention some of the key points in this regard. Actually, people around us very often take an evolutionary perspective to indicate our journey from pre-modern to post-modern. As Professor Santosh has already informed us that somebody tried to explain it as a periodizing concept. And in this periodizing manner, we may indicate the journey from pre-modern to post-modern via the complicated paths of modernity. In that case, without delving deep into the arguments, if it is at all possible to accept it as a periodizing concept or not, in that case too, the differences between pre-modern and modern or between modern and post-modern should not be made in a mechanical way. Taking the risk of oversimplification, it is said that pre-modern society indicates a social pattern that is in place prior to industrial revolution. It is basically agrarian and pertaining to non-industrial societies. Modern society is equated with the age of enlightenment, that is tentatively from 1685 to 1815, an industrial revolution from 1760 to 1840. Postmodern signifies another industrial revolution. Tentatively from 1950s onwards, it is a kind of digital or technological revolution. Without delving deep into the nuances of the above statements, we like to highlight the fact that such advances have its definite impacts on our lifestyle, on our value system, on our work pattern, even on our diets and habits, health problems, education, attitude towards religion, law, politics. And those, I think, are very important for our discussion. Particularly for our students, let me say, in Bengali a few words, যদি না আমাদের অন্তত মোটা দাগের কথাগুলো পরিষ্কার থাকে যে আমরা প্রাক আধুনিক বলতে কি বুঝি, আধুনিক বলতে কি বুঝি এবং উত্তর আধুনিক বলতে কি বুঝি, এবং তার মোটামুটি বিতর্কগুলো কেমন, তাহলে কিন্তু আমরা ভারতীয় সমাজ সম্পর্কে যে তার যে চরিত্র চিত্রণের যে উদ্যোগটা হাতে নিয়েছি, সেই উদ্যোগে আমরা কিন্তু বেশি দূর যেতে পারবো না। এই জায়গাটা আমাদের একটু পরিষ্কার করতে হবে। তা মডার্নাইজেশনের কথা এসে আমরা বলি, emphasizing on the very concept of modernization or modernity, we must be aware of its various implications, particularly its differences with the terms like industrialization, westernization, urbanization, and so on. Very often, these terms we used to pronounce in an interchangeable manner, which is not proper so far as academic exercise is concerned. The various uses, like the concepts like modernity, modernization, modernism, are also used very loosely. The references to Francis Lyotard has been made more than twice here. I like to rather add, what did Lyotard mean by postmodern condition is very much important in this regard. Again, while designating our concept of postmodernism as a periodizing concept, we must have to keep in mind whether we are going to refer some sort of continuity or a kind of break. Actually, modernism, modernity, postmodernism, postmodern conditions, these are multi-layered concepts that we must have to remember. In case of our comparison between pre-modern and modern, it is not proper to label it as some sort of old and new phenomenon. It may not help us to go forward in this regard. Rather, the questions like fact-value dichotomy and or science-religion interface is very much essential for us. I do not like to go into the details of these theoretical arguments that will take much time. I think theoretical discussions have been made by Professor Raghavendra at length, and for the benefit of our students, we should now focus more on contemporary Indian society. Turning to Indian scenario, as I have already said, the most important question is how do we view Indian society today? Are we in a position to categorize it to any of the compartments as mentioned in the title? I like to indicate the use of the term or. Is it pre-modern, or modern, or postmodern? The first point that I am willing to make, that our main focus is not ancient India, nor India in the Middle Ages. Our focus is on contemporary India. And while dealing with contemporary India, we are not in a position to categorize it in either ways. I know that several controversies are involved in it, and one may prefer this regard. That is, we are modern in our own way, and in that case, how is our kind of modernity? How is our modernity? I like to refer Partho Chatterjee in this context. একটা খুব ভালো লেখা যে কেউ পড়ে নিতে পারো, অজুহাত চলবে না যে বাংলায় নেই, ইংরেজিতেও আছে, আওয়ার মডার্নিটি, বাংলাতে আছে, যার টাইটেল হচ্ছে আমাদের আধুনিকতা। পার্থ চ্যাটার্জির একটা বই বাংলা সংকলন আছে, ইতিহাসের উত্তরাধিকার, বইটার নাম আনন্দ পাবলিশার প্রকাশ করেছে। এই বইতে আমাদের আধুনিকতা এই শিরোনামে একটি লেখা আছে। আমি লেখাটা আমাদের ছাত্রছাত্রীদের একবার পড়ে দেখতে বলবো। সেখানটা আমরা দেখব যে whenever we talk of modernity, তখন কিন্তু আমাদের মডার্নিটিটা অন্যরকম। How is it? The modernity of the people who have long experienced colonial rule. Our colonial experience and the kind of modernity that we have experienced went hand in hand to each other. একদা উপনিবেশের আধুনিকতা। Once upon a time, আমরা যে ঔপনিবেশিকতার মধ্যে ছিলাম, সেই সময়ে কিভাবে আমাদের আধুনিকতার ধ্যান ধারণার সঙ্গে পরিচয় ঘটল, কিভাবে আমরা বিকশিত হয়ে উঠলাম, সেইটা একটু দেখতে। একেবারে যদি বাংলা ভাষাভাষী পাঠকের দরজায় আমি হাজির হয়ে যাই পার্থ চ্যাটার্জির এই লেখাটা নিয়ে, তাহলে দেখব যে ইনিশিয়ালি we were not very habituated in using the term modernity. The very concept of old and new was very much relevant in those days. 1873 রাজনারায়ণ বসুর লেখা সেকাল ও একাল, 19 শতকের বাংলায়, তখন তো প্রাক আধুনিক, আধুনিক এসব শব্দগুলোর চল হয়নি। তখন নব্য এবং প্রাচীন এই ধরনের কথাবার্তা তখন ছিল। পাশ্চাত্য ভাবধারার সংস্পর্শে আমাদের নব্যতা কিভাবে বিকশিত হয়ে উঠলো তার কথাবার্তা সেই সময়ে বড় করে দেখা। কিন্তু এখানে আমি একটু গুলিয়ে দিতে চাইছি, by invoking the term post-colonialism in this regard. If the kind of modernity that we have inculcated during those days may be regarded as some kind of post-colonialism, এখানেও একটা হাইফেনের অনেক মূল্য, জানো তো, আমি ছাত্রছাত্রীদের উদ্দেশ্যে বলি। When the very prefix post is hyphenated by, then the meaning of post-colonialism or post-modernism may give us something different, somewhat different. So a hyphenated post-colonialism বা hyphenated post-modernism যখন আমরা বলি, তখন দুটোর মধ্যে একটা আন্তঃসম্পর্কের কথাও আমাদের মনে পড়ে। আচ্ছা, আমাদের ঔপনিবেশিক যুগটা কবে থেকে শুরু হয়েছিল? When did actually the days of colonialism in India started? Usually, we are referring to gradual British domination in this regard. But one may have the option to refer to Mughal era or to go back to the coming of the Aryans in this country. তাহলে কবে থেকে শুরু হলো আমাদের এই ঔপনিবেশিক শাসনের? আর্যদের ভারত আক্রমণের সময় থেকে। মুঘলদের আধিপত্যের সময় থেকে নাকি ঔপনিবেশিক যুগ? Again we may say, who were the actual colonized persons? ঔপনিবেশিত অ্যাকচুয়ালি কারা? আমাদের আলাদা আলাদা স্ট্যান্ড, আলাদা আলাদা জায়গায় আমাদের পৌঁছে দিতে পারে। এমনকি ব্রিটিশ আমলেও সমস্ত ভারতবাসীরাই কি উপনিবেশিত? Or those who ally with our British rulers were not so colonized in comparison to other kind of people? এসব নিয়ে অনেক তর্ক বিতর্কের জায়গা আছে, but still if we want to understand the very nature of modernity that prevailed among us, that prevailed in India, Partha Chatterjee's writing may help us a lot. In a different context, Professor Amartya Mukhopadhyay wrote another article in a different kind of literature on Indian literature rather. তার লেখাটার শিরোনামটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট, ভাঙা আয়না, ভারতীয় সাহিত্যে রাষ্ট্র বিগ্রহ, how the image of the state appeared in Indian languages. There also we find some reflections on the very nature of modernity that we inculcated. এই যে একটা বিগ্রহায়িত একটা ইমেজ বিল্ডিং, এই ইমেজ বিল্ডিং এর সঙ্গে আমরা যদি এবার একটু যোগ করে দিই আওয়ার স্ট্রাগল এগেইনস্ট কলোনিয়ালিজমের জায়গা থেকে, একটা ভারত মাতা, the very image of a Bharat Mata or Mother India appeared. Our idea of India molded very much with this kind of projection. এবং এই যে একটা প্রজেকশন, একটা ভাব বা ধারণা, একটা তার মধ্যে যেমন একটা জিওগ্রাফিক্যাল এন্টিটি হিসেবে ইন্ডিয়ার একটা যে চিত্র সেটা যেমন ফুটে আসছে, তেমনি the very attitude to India that has also been reflected. তা এরকম একটা ইমেজ তাকে যদি আমরা বাদ বলে ধরে নিই, তার প্রতিবাদের নানা দিকও তার সঙ্গে সঙ্গে কিন্তু আমাদের মধ্যে স্পষ্ট হবে। আমরা যদি এখানে কথা উঠেছে অনেকগুলো মানুষের, তাদের ইমেজ অফ ইন্ডিয়া, আমাদের উপনিবেশ লালিত যে মডার্নিটি, the kind of modernity nurtured by our association with colonialism, তার সঙ্গে কি আমরা সবসময় পাল্লা দিতে পেরেছি? বা আমরা সবসময় কি একইভাবে ভাবতে পেরেছি, নাকি ডিফারেন্ট প্রজেকশনস came to us as regards our modernity? এখানে উত্থাপিত হয়েছে অন্তত 4টি নাম বড় করে এসছে। এই 4টি নামের মধ্যে রবীন্দ্রনাথ এসেছেন, গান্ধীজি এসেছেন, বিবেকানন্দ এসেছেন, অরবিন্দ এসেছেন। এদেরকে আমরা কি বলবো? প্রি মডার্ন বলবো না মডার্ন বলবো, নাকি আজকের দিনের পার্সপেক্টিভে পোস্ট মডার্ন আর পোস্ট কলোনিয়াল বলবো? রুডলফ সাহেবরা তো আগেই লিখে ফেলেছেন পোস্ট মডার্ন গান্ধী। শুধু গান্ধী সম্পর্কে নয়, রবীন্দ্রনাথকে পোস্ট কলোনিয়াল থিঙ্কারের ন্যারো ফ্রেমে বাঁধা যায় কিনা, whether we can confine Tagore within a narrow frame of post-colonial thinker, questions have already been raised today. So here we find that the kind of modernity nurtured during colonial period in our country had its varied manifestations. আমাদের এই যে অসংখ্য ধরনের ব্যাখ্যা বিশ্লেষণের জায়গাটা আছে, সেই ব্যাখ্যা বিশ্লেষণ থেকে we have to build our own idea of India. Here, I like to refer the writings of Marx. It is very often said, of course rightly said, that Marxism is again another manifestation of our modernist outlook. Okay, that is fine. যে মার্ক্সবাদের সঙ্গে মডার্নিজমের উৎসগত যে সম্পর্কটা, সেই সম্পর্কটা নিয়ে আমি কোনো বক্তৃতা করতে চাই। But the previous speaker have already referred to the writings of Marx, particularly after 1850s. 1850 সালের পরবর্তী সময়ের মার্ক্সের লেখাপত্র সম্পর্কে প্রফেসর রাঘবেন্দ্র অলরেডি আমাদেরকে ইনফর্ম করেছেন, এবং সেখানে আমরা কি দেখেছি, মার্ক্সের যে ওয়েস্ট সেন্ট্রিক যে এক্সপ্লানেশনের কথা বলে তাকে অভিযুক্ত করা হয়, বা অন্যভাবে বলি একটা ইউনিলিনিয়ার রিডাকশনিস্ট অ্যাপ্রোচ টুয়ার্ডস সোসাইটি মার্ক্স দিয়েছেন বলে তাকে অভিযুক্ত করা হয়, তার থেকে মার্ক্স যেন আস্তে আস্তে সরে এসেছেন তার শেষ পর্বের লেখাগুলো। I don't like to burden you with so many writings of Marx in this regard. There are some collections also, Marx on India and like so. But I like to mention one important book that come out recently in this regard, and that may be a very sumptuous food for thought if we go through it. The name of the book is Marx and the Margins on Nationalism, Ethnicity and Non-Western Society. Author of the book is K.B. Anderson. K.B. Anderson's book actually helps us to read Marx in a new way, particularly in relation to his insights on non-Western societies, on ethnic problems of identity, as well as on the problems of nationalism. Without going into the details of all this, we should keep in mind that there are perceptible strides towards making India a modern nation during our colonial days. Yet, we must remember that we have tried to build the castle with our notable historical past. Without referring to India's notable historical past, we may not be able to understand the very nature of modernity as it grew up during our colonial days. And if we concentrate on this aspect of history, then we must discern, we must find out our changing value pattern, which needs a serious consideration in this context. Here, we find a very fine contrast. The contrast between the world's own civilization and our own replica of modern society. Let me repeat, world's old civilization and our own replica of a modern society. What do we find? that the multi-religious, multi-racial, multilingual, multi-ethnic Indian society interacts with modern values like democracy, equality, cultural plurality, gender justice, sustainability. We must not forget that we represent in the second largest populated country in the world. Here, our basic capital is, given the plural nature of this population, our basic capital is our age-old value of unity in diversity. বসুধৈব কুটুম্বকমের কথা আমরা বলেছি, কিন্তু যে কথাটা আমাদের বেশি করে বলতে হবে, what we have to emphasize most is the new significance acquired by the term unity in diversity, বসুধৈব কুটুম্বকম. So we find that actually there has been a fusion of values involving our modernity and tradition. The old features got transformed, but not abolished. Our old features got transformed, but not abolished. What we have to identify that those features got new meaning in our and added new value in our socio-economic and political discourses. As student of political science, I prefer to mention here the famous speech of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly while handing over the draft constitution to it. He said that we are entering into a new phase of Indian history where our society, where the polity we are giving to you based on equality, but our society is unequal and divided. একটা অসম সমাজে সমতার চাষবাস আমরা করতে যাচ্ছি। আমার সমাজটা fragmented. In a fragmented society, we are trying to impose, we are trying to cultivate some values of modernity, some values of liberalism, and so on and so forth. We may take 2 or 3 examples in this. Caste system is a very age-old phenomena in our country. Besides religion, it may be regarded as the second most influential practice in our country. As a social practice of hierarchy, as a social practice of fragmentation, its appeal has been going down over the years. আমার ঠাকুমা দিদিমারা যেভাবে জাতপাতের ভেদাভেদ করতেন, সামাজিকভাবে আজকে আমরা আর তা করি না। অসবর্ণ বিবাহ আমাদের সামাজিক সত্তাকে ততখানি তছনছ করে দেয় না, নেই আমি বলছি। I am not claiming that we have done away with all these things. আজকে রবিবার, আজকের আনন্দবাজারের পাত্রপাত্রী পাতাটা খুললেই দেখা যাবে ইনস্টিটিউশন অফ কাস্ট is still more or less important. But my submission is that caste is more important today as a political category than as a social category. in case of religion too, we may say, প্রাতিষ্ঠানিক ধর্ম, রবীন্দ্রনাথের ভাষায় যাকে ধর্মতন্ত্র আমরা বলি, that is more powerful today than it is practiced in the personal sphere. এখানে রজনী কোঠারির কথা আমার মনে আসে, the famous political scientist who told us that it is a kind of politicization of tradition or traditionalization of politics. রাজনীতির সনাতনীকরণ না সনাতনের রাজনীতিকরণ? But all these went on hand in hand with our march towards modernity. We must have to remember. সুতরাং এই জায়গাটায় দাঁড়িয়ে আমরা বলতে চাইছি যে our modernity is somewhat different from the kind of modernity as in the theoretical discourses modernity appears before us. In case of our economic developments too, we may take the example, our lopsided growth, krishi na shilpo, industry or agriculture, নন অ্যাগ্রেরিয়ান পপুলেশন বেশি হলে তাকে ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়ালাইজ বলবো, তাকে আরবান বলবো, তাকে বেশি আধুনিক বলবো কিনা এ বিতর্ক পাশে থাক, দরকার নেই। কিন্তু আমরা যদি আমাদের মতো দেশে সামগ্রিক অর্থনীতির ছবিটার দিকে যদি একবার তাকাই, we need not go into the details of it, but the overall picture teaches us many things. স্বাধীনতার 50 বছরে দেশ পত্রিকা তার একটা প্রচ্ছদ চিত্র এঁকেছে। সেই প্রচ্ছদ চিত্রটা কেমন ছিল? একটা হাতে টানা রিক্সা, যা কম হলেও কলকাতা শহরে এখনো আছে একবিংশ শতাব্দীতে, মানুষে টেনে নিয়ে যায় মানুষকে। সেই হাতে টানা রিক্সার উপর বসানো আছে একটা সুপার কম্পিউটার। What kind of message it conveys? That a manual, traditional, and perhaps primitive type of vehicle has been carrying a very modern instrument. It is very symbolic. আমাদের সফটওয়্যার ইঞ্জিনিয়াররা সারা পৃথিবী দাপিয়ে বেড়াচ্ছে। Our software engineers are conquering across the countries, and the bulk of our peasantry is still singing Allah Magde Pani De. This is called lopsided economic growth. And this kind of lopsided economic growth involves us to theorize differently even the economic theories of modernity, capitalism. The transition, the very nature of transition has been explained as bullock capitalism. What does it mean? Bullock cart capitalism. গরুর গাড়িতে টানা পুঁজিবাদ আমরা তৈরি করেছি। Such are the nuances of modernity prevailing in our country. But take it from me, You may believe it or not, this kind of discourses are quite old enough. এই আলোচনাগুলো পুরনো হয়ে গেছে। আমাদের স্টুডেন্ট ডেতে, in our student days, this kind of discussion was very current. But today, things have been changed a lot. The debate relating to modernity of tradition, the famous book wrote by Lloyd and Susan Ridon long ago, is old now. That very Lloyd and Susan Ridon is writing today different kind of discourses on Indian society. Though it is not, those are not rejected or disowned till date, but references are made to the new waves of ideas that came before us, particularly since the last decades of the 20th century. And it compelled us to look at old things in a new perspective. পুরনো জিনিসকে নতুন ভাবে দেখার চোখ আমাদেরকে খুলতে হচ্ছে। We are now prone to look into the old things under a new perspective. The intellectual discourses in the last 2 decades helped us to reread our existing literature with a new perspective and looking at the things with a new vigor. So it is my humble appeal to all concerned, particularly to my students, that there is a need for rereading Indian society through the new looking glasses available to us today. Whether we subscribe to the tools of postmodernism or not, that is a different thing. I am not going into those arguments at all. Yes, it is, to my mind, it appears very much deceiving rather, very much deceiving. If you are in a position to conceptualize what is postmodernism in a finest manner, I may say that it is not postmodernism at all. But that's a different story. Still, I should say that postmodernism opened up a new vistas in my life, in our life, to look at things in a different. Professor Santosh mentioned Fukuyama's famous book, The End of History in the Last Man. Whether the history ended or not, I do not know. But still, author-reader relationship has to be renewed. Author-reader relationship has to be renewed. He tried to say that author is very much dead, reader is very much alive. I do not subscribe to this view, that's another question. Whether the author is completely dead or not, that's not my viewpoint here. But still, there are different layers of meaning within a definite text is very much important to note. That in the name of universality, in the name of totality, you are not in a position to claim that everything has already been said, what you had to say. We are here to derive new meaning from the text already available to us. During the time of Gandhi, Tagore, Vivekananda and so on, we were not familiar with ideas like postmodernity, postcoloniality and so on. But still, we are discovering newer meaning from the text available. here we have already referred to postmodern Gandhi. In this context, I may be allowed to refer to the writings of Ashish Nandi. Ashish Nandi মতো লেখকেরা, শুধু আশিস নন্দী নন, কিন্তু আশিস নন্দীর মতো লেখকেরা বোধ করি আমাদেরকে একটু নাড়িয়ে দিয়েছেন। তো সেখানে বিশেষ করে আমি বলবো দুটো প্রশ্ন এই প্রসঙ্গে আমি স্থাপন করতে চাই। আমি আর বেশি সময় নেব না। কি দুটো প্রশ্ন? কন্টেম্পোরারি ইন্ডিয়ান সোসাইটিকে বোঝার ক্ষেত্রে দুটো কনসেপ্ট বোধহয় খুব বেশি ইম্পর্টেন্ট। দি ভেরি কনসেপ্টস অফ ন্যাশনালিজম অ্যান্ড সেকুলারিজম became very important to understand the contemporary Indian society. And in these two scores, we find new discourses emanating from authors like Ashish Nandi and so on. It is not only Ashish Nandi. If you go through the Ramchandra Boh's books, particularly on Tagore's nationalism, he has given a very finest introduction of Tagore's speeches on nationalism. And there we understand Tagore's position, particularly on nationalism, on East-West relation, on attitude towards cosmopolitanism and its differences between globalization and cosmopolitanism or internationalism as represented by Tagore. Whether we are going through the classes of civilization or we are confronting crisis of civilization, that we have to focus anew if we look at contemporary Indian society from a newer angle. So, here we say that separate discussion may be organized, particularly on Indian nationalism, on Indian secularism. Here in the very short spell, I like to say that the very term secularism, as originated out of enlightenment, out of Renaissance, provide a different meaning than those we ascribe to it in India. বাংলায় সেকুলারিজম শব্দের অর্থ ধর্মনিরপেক্ষতা করা হয়ে থাকে। আমি ব্যক্তিগতভাবে মনে করি না এটা খুব ভালো শব্দ। বাংলায় সেকুলারিজম লেখা আমি বেশি পছন্দ করি, কারণ ইংরেজিতে সেকুলারিজম বললে ওয়েস্টার্ন কনসেপ্ট অফ সেকুলারিজমকে আমরা বুঝি। বাংলায় ধর্মনিরপেক্ষতা যখন বলি তখন ইন্ডিয়ান কনটেক্সট অফ সেকুলারিজমের কথাই আমাদের মনে আসে। And for your information, let me say, these two are completely different. Now, time has come to focus on it in a different manner. রাজীব ভার্গবের বইতে অনেক মণিমাণিক্য সংযোজিত হয়েছে, সেকুলারিজম অ্যান্ড ইটস ক্রিটিক্স। সেখানে আশিস নন্দীরও লেখা আছে, সেখানে টি.এন. মদনের লেখা আছে। অ্যাকচুয়ালি কোনটা সিউডো সেকুলারিজম, কোনটা সেকুলারিজম ইন দ্য ওয়েস্টার্ন পার্সপেক্টিভ, কোনটা সেকুলারিজম ইন ইন্ডিয়ান পার্সপেক্টিভ, আমি শেষের দিকে এসে বলি। ইন্ডিয়ান কনস্টিটিউশন কি ধরনের ডকুমেন্ট, সেটা নিয়েও কথা উঠেছে। সেখান থেকে আমরা বলছি যে এটা এখনই time is not right for taking a decision that ours is a pre-modern, modern or post-modern society. It's still a matter of deliberation and debate. Let's the debate continues even after this seminar, and debate should be in a more vigorous manner. It should be continued in a lively manner, and it is the question of identity. Identity in the sense that we got multiple identity. What about the identity of myself? How do we view our own society? It's a very pertinent question, and let the debate goes on. Thank you. Thank you, organizers. With these few words, I'd like to conclude my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Modak. You have elaborated some other important point, particularly the theoretical perspective, in a very well-organized manner. Yes, it is. We have put this name to actually instigate all these things. So we may start another series of sessions on this issue, on a particular issue. For example, Indian secularism, Indian communalism, etc. So many things are there. So we have tried to actually to go the ball, to move the ball running, and it has run. So we are actually successful in our endeavor. So there are several aspects of all this discussion, and I am very enriched with all these things. Just there will be some question here, and some students and participants will be asking that question. My very simple question is that to Debnarayan, that is, if there are no actually some principles at our hand, so how would I judge myself that I am not going astray? I am not going to the jungle 1 second. So if you say all these things in some generic terminology and do not specify it, is it not to manage all these things? My first question to Debnarayan, and then other participants are requested to raise their questions one by one.
You see, the very terms, as I have already said, the pre-modern, modern, and post-modern. These are very broad labels.
Yes.
These are very broad levels, and there are so many nuances involved in all these categories.
Yes.
Ours is not only a plural society, ours is a very complicated society as well.
Yes.
And in this compulsion, sometimes we feel that pre-modern values are gradually coming up and getting new strength from our modern political or social existence. But actually, what are coming back from our pre-modern days are not to be rejected as very old aspects. Those pre-modern values acquire new significance in a new circumstances. I think it should be explained as altogether new phenomenon. So it should not be rejected simply on the ground that those are old, you are backward enough, so you are inculcating all these things. This should not be our practice. So I am not in a position to label it as pre-modern at all. we are under peculiar conditions of modernity, imbibing our postmodern methodologies to explain our modernist self. এটা হচ্ছে এক কথায় পার্থ চ্যাটার্জি লিখেছেন তার ওখানটা, এটা হচ্ছে একদা উপনিবেশের আধুনিকতা। একদা উপনিবেশের আধুনিকতা হিসেবে আমরা কিন্তু অনেক কিছু ব্যাকলগ বহন করে নিয়ে যাচ্ছি, which were to be abolished long ago, but those survived and we are carrying all this our burdens with ourselves, and that find its newer allies in the new epochs of history. So we are actually not labeling ourselves as pre-modern. We are modern according to our own image, and we are using some kind of fusion are going on from pre-modern to post-modern, etc.
Yes, please. So I'll request other participants to raise any queries or question. Before that, actually you get ready. I'm just asking one query to our Professor Raghavendra Singh sir. That is, you are mentioned actually the today's problem as equality versus hierarchy, collectivism versus individualism, and secularism versus religion in some such terminology. And this exactly is the position where we stand now. So I'll give just one definitive answer in this question. That is, the question of hierarchy we get from, say, for example, Monu Sangita. And that is very problematic in understanding, in cope up with that text. So if I say that portion of Monu Sangita be discarded and the other part is accepted, is it at all possible, sir? How can it be possible?
Okay. Yeah. So, let me, before I come to this question, let me just give a brief look on what you asked to my fellow speaker, Professor Modak, about the classification of pre-modern, modern and post-modern, or ancient, medieval, modern, history kind of a thing, or orthodox and heterodox traditions in India. These categorizations are purely academic ones. Because if you look at the themes of these categorization, themes are running across. There's so many themes from ancient India which we find in the medieval and also in the modern periods. So thematically there is no such rupture. Themes have been, sometimes it has been modified or reinterpreted or maybe partially dropped also in certain rare cases, and people have to try to redefine it. So but when we go to the classrooms, then we have to make certain academic decisions so that we can communicate our ideas in certain categories. But these categories are very fluid. Let us not take it very fixed ones. So conceptually, we are at a place where concepts get defined, redefined. From Plato's time up to Hegel, concepts have been getting defined, redefined, and again defined. This way it goes on. Now, so far as hierarchy and things are concerned, in fact, it has a very mythological origin. So there is a myth behind it, the concept of Purusha in the Riga Veda, that from the head the planets came, from the hands, Kshatriya came, stomach the businessman, and the service class from the legs, kind of a thing. So since the Purusha was lying, so they say that there was no hierarchy in it. But when society started getting structured, then in the society, some hierarchy has to prevail in some way or another. It has been prevailing even in the egalitarian societies like Soviet Union, even in China, even in Cuba also, you will find. To a great extent, that solve the human problems of education, of health, of employment, of accommodation and everything else. But then when you want to become a cosmonaut, there were a problem during Soviet era also. So there was some kind of political hierarchy. It may not be antagonistic, but it was a non-antagonistic kind of a hierarchy which was there, contradiction which was prevailing there in the society. So, if we look at the West, because before the law they made everybody equal in modernity. Constitution came up, and before the law everybody was equal. So there was a lovely essay written by John Locke, a letter concerning toleration. So it was in that letter he has said that there are certain people who cannot be tolerated. Those are the, those who did not believe in God, they cannot be tolerated. John Locke is writing like this. So he said that when you are taking an job in the office, you have to swear in the name of God. But the atheists do not believe in God. So how to tolerate such people? That was a kind of a difficult question.
Sir, I can understand your answer. That is, there are hierarchy in almost all societies. But
It has been there. But the way discrimination
labor, which type of labor I give, which position and my contribution to a particular production house or particular area. But as our Ambedkar is saying, that it is not a division of labor, it is the division of the laborer themselves. That is the
discrimination. That is the discrimination.
Yeah, that is the
discrimination within the equal labor situation also. So it's a problem of discrimination that has to be addressed. And it has a history of its origin, and it has various labels of discrimination. So caste could be, there could be, various factors are involved in it. But the discrimination has to be resolved on the basis of certain incentives which are given, as Ambedkar thought about it, because he was for the egalitarian, but for the Dalit class. So if you pursue the logic of Ambedkar's egalitarianism, it doesn't exist before him. Marx was much wider, and because he was talking of human emancipation, kind of it. Ambedkar was to the discrimination of the Dalits, kind of it. Yeah, discrimination requires a different kind of articulation and kind of a thing. And hierarchy has a different kind of because it is structural, and the structures, even if they are changed, it still the discrimination persists in the society.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. And now, any other queries from any participant? Popon, can you raise the question?
আমি অনুরোধ করছি যারা আছেন যদি প্রশ্ন থাকে কিছু করুন। হ্যালো
Hello.
Jawaharlal sir.
Hello. Thanks, Santosh.
I know that you have joined Vidyasagar University very recently. Is it true?
Yeah. Thank you, Dada. Just I have a small query from Debnarayan sir. Sir, I am very much grateful and obliged for your thought-provoking talk. Really, I am very much enlightened. But one concept, sir, regarding secularism. So, you are very clearly distinguished between the concept secularism, like the Indian context, and the context about abroad, like foreign. So, I think, sir, when we think about the term secularism, we are defining the term secularism is secularism. But as per your talk, sir, you clearly distinguish that you appreciate the term secularism in a regional context. So I think, sir, secularism may be different in different context, but how we can distinguish between the concept of regional concept of secularism and the concept of secularism like the different culture, like foreign culture.
It's a very interesting question. That is, there must be some central idea of the concept of secularism, and that you are applying to a particular situation, say for India. So how could you distinguish that point? That is just about.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
My first point is that I am not referring to any kind of regional explanation of secularism. I just mentioned secularism as the concept stands for in the light of the Renaissance, as the light of its Western perspective, where everything mundane is referring as secular only, no relationship with religion. In the Indian context, we are referring to secularism as equidistance from all religion. Here the reference to religion is prime in Indian context, whereas in the Western concept, it is said that no reference to religion can be made. আমি একটু বাংলায় বলি অন্যদের সুবিধের জন্য, সেটা হচ্ছে যে যুক্তির জয় বিশ্বাসের ক্ষয়. Two important terms. One is faith system or belief structure. Secularism is a term which is defined in the dictionaries as devoid of any kind of belief system. No belief system is associated with it. But in India, we do not discard any kind of belief system or religious practice. We only refer to equality of all religions or keeping equidistance from all religions. So these two perspective is different. No kind of religious difference, no kind of regional meaning of the term, Indian context and Western context. Lastly, what I said is that the translation in Bengali, আমরা বলি ধর্ম নিরপেক্ষতা হচ্ছে সেকুলারিজমের বাংলা প্রতিশব্দ. এখানে আমি বলছি ধর্ম নিরপেক্ষতা শব্দটি বলতে আমরা যা বোঝাই, ইংরেজি সেকুলারিজম বলতে অন্য কিছু বোঝায়. সো বাংলাতেও সেকুলার শব্দের বাংলা সেকুলার করলেই ভালো হয়. যেমন আমরা কাপকে কাপ বলি, প্লেটকে প্লেট বলি, চেয়ারকে চেয়ার বলি, তেমনি সেকুলারিজমের সন্তোষবাবুর সাথে আমি একমত, একটা কনসেপ্টের একটা মিনিং থাকতে হবে. সেকুলারিজম আমি বলি সেকুলারের সেন্ট্রাল মিনিং সেকুলার হোক, যখন তাকে ধর্ম নিরপেক্ষতা বলি, ইন্ডিয়ান অ্যান্ড ওয়েস্টার্ন যে পার্সপেক্টিভের যে ডিফারেন্স, সেটা হারিয়ে যায় আমাদের চিন্তা. দ্যাটস মাই পয়েন্ট. ওকে,
Thank you, sir. So really, I enjoyed your talk. So thank you.
Anybody? Thank you, Jada sir. Anybody else?
তখন আমার একটা প্রশ্ন আছে। দেবনারায়ণ বাবুর কাছে একটা প্রশ্ন ছিল। আপনি মডার্নিটি, প্রি মডার্নিটি, পোস্ট মডার্নিটি এবং মডার্নিটি, এই তিনটে জায়গা নিয়ে কথা বললেন রিগার্ডিং রিডার অ্যান্ড দ্য রাইটার ডিসকোর্সে। তো সেইখানে আমার কিছুই আমি প্রায় কিচ্ছু জানি না, ফলে একদম শূন্য থেকে প্রশ্নটা করছি। প্রথমত আদৌ প্রি মডার্নিটি থেকে মডার্নিটি এবং সেখান থেকে পোস্ট মডার্নিটি এরকম কোনো স্পষ্ট বিভাজন রেখা হয় কিনা, এটা আমার প্রথম প্রশ্নটা। দ্বিতীয়ত, যখন আমি একজন রিডার হিসেবে কোনো লেখা পড়ছি, আমি এটা শুনেছি যে পোস্ট মডার্নিজমে কোনো বিষয়কে নতুন ভাবে রিডার এবং অথারের রিলেশনটাকে রিইন্টারপ্রেট করা হয়। ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন অফ টেক্সট সেখানে গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ভূমিকা পালন করে। ফলে আমি একটা বই যেভাবে পড়ছি, সেখানে লেখক কি ভেবে লিখছেন সেটা থেকেও আমার পড়াটা, আমি কিভাবে বিষয়টাকে দেখছি সেটাও সমান গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। কিন্তু স্যার, তাহলে তো যখন আমরা ভারতীয় দর্শনের মতো কোনো ফিলোসফির কোর টেক্সট পড়ি, যেখানে একটা নির্দিষ্ট ক্রাইটেরিয়া আছে, উনি যেটা বলেছেন সেটাই বুঝতে হবে, তাহলে তো স্যার পোস্ট মডার্নিজমে এসে সেটা সম্পূর্ণ ভেঙে যায়। তাহলে তো যে যেভাবে বুঝছে, যে মানে এরকম ভাবেই লিখছে, সেটাকেই ফাইনাল ধরতে হয়। দেয়ার ইজ নাথিং কল্ড অ্যাবসলিউট। আমার একটা সমস্যা হবে।
আচ্ছা, থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ। প্রথম কথাটা হচ্ছে যে 3টে ক্যাটেগরি আজকের আলোচনার টাইটেলে বলা আছে, কিন্তু 3টে ক্যাটেগরির মধ্যে কোনো চীনের প্রাচীর নেই। এমনকি এটাও কিন্তু আমরা বলছি যে এই 3টে, there is no Chinese wall between and among these 3 perspectives. এগুলো স্যার খুব ভালো বলেছেন, তো প্রফেসর রাঘবেন্দ্র খুব ভালো বলেছেন যে কিভাবে এটা যে ইন্টারমিংলিং হচ্ছে এবং কোনোটাকে অ্যাবসলিউট ক্যাটেগরি হিসেবে আমরা বোধহয় গ্রহণ করতে পারি না। এটা হচ্ছে প্রথম। এখানে এবার অথর রিডার ডিসকোর্সের ক্ষেত্রে এসে আমরা বলি যে এই প্রশ্নটা কিন্তু প্রি মডার্ন এমনকি মডার্ন ডিসকোর্সের মধ্যেও কিন্তু এই প্রশ্নটা উত্থাপিত হয়নি। সেখানে বরং আমরা এটাই শিখেছি যে লেখার মধ্যে দিয়ে লেখক আমাদের সামনে এসে দাঁড়ান, ট্রাই টু আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ড হোয়াট দি অথর সেজ। এটাই হচ্ছে আমাদের পার্সপেক্টিভ ইন মডার্ন অথরশিপ আমরা বলতে পারি। এবং এইটাকে বিশেষ করে ফুকোর পার্সপেক্টিভ থেকে আমরা যদি দেখি, তাহলে বলবো যে এইটাকেই আপসাইড ডাউন করে দেওয়ার একটা চেষ্টা আছে। এটা আমি বলছি মানে আমি এটা গ্রহণ করছি তা কিন্তু নয়। তিনি বলতে চাইছেন, একটু কাব্য করে বলি, সমুদ্রের বালুকা বেলায় মানুষের যে মুখ আঁকা হয়েছিল, তরঙ্গের পর তরঙ্গের অভিঘাতে একদিন তা যাবে মিলিয়ে। ফুকোর এক অক্ষম ট্রান্সলেশন আমি করলাম। তো কিভাবে মানুষের মুখটা মিলিয়ে যাচ্ছে, অথরের মুখটা কিভাবে মিলিয়ে যাচ্ছে, থ্রু কনফ্লিক্টিং ইন্টারপ্রিটেশনস অ্যান্ড রিইন্টারপ্রিটেশনস। এবং তার মধ্যে দিয়ে বলা হচ্ছে there are multiple layers of meaning within a definite text. Try to find out your own meaning from the text. এবং এক্ষেত্রে অথরের মৃত্যু ঘোষণা আর ইতিহাসের শেষ ঘোষণা, যেটা ফ্রান্সিস ফুকুয়ামের কথাই বলছে, এই দুটো এসে সিমেট্রিক্যাল হয়ে যাচ্ছে। এটা আমি বলছি মানে কিন্তু এটা নয় যে আমি এটা গ্রহণ করছি, বরং এই কথা বলে আমি আলোচনাটা গোটাই আপাতত, যেটা হচ্ছে আপনার প্রশ্নটাই আমার প্রশ্ন। আমিও এটা মনে করি যে তাই যদি হবে, তাহলে চিন্তার ক্ষেত্রে একটা নৈরাজ্য তৈরি হবে না তো? Are we not heading towards some sort of intellectual fail if we accept this kind of explanation emanating from postmodern outlook? এটা আমার অতএব সেদিক থেকে one with you. Thank you.
আসলে আমরা আরোপ করতেই ভালোবাসি। উনি এটা বলেছেন, এটাই মানতে হবে। মানে ফলে নতুন ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন সেখানে যতই শুনলে মনে হয় গ্রহণযোগ্য, ঠিকই তো, মানে নতুন করে ভাবতে শেখায় আমাদের, কিন্তু তারপরেও মনে হয় যেটা আপনি যেভাবে শেষ করলেন, যে না, যেটা উনি বলে গেছেন সেটাই বোধহয় বোঝাটা ঠিক ছিল। স্যার, এক্সেলেন্ট টপিক। তখন মানে এইরকম বিষয় বহুদিন বাদে, মানে জেনারেলি ফিলোসফির সিলেবাসের ভেতর থেকে হয়, কিন্তু বাইরে থেকে প্রত্যেককে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ জানাই।
একটা শব্দ খালি আমি সংযোজন করি, সেটা হচ্ছে ফুকোল্ডিয়ান পার্সপেক্টিভ অফ নলেজ। সেখানে কিন্তু কিওয়ার্ডটা হচ্ছে পাওয়ার। The question of power is also very much relevant here. That's all I have.
Professor Santosh, just I want to okay, just very briefly I'll be there. Two issues which have just come up about secularism and also regarding the interpretation of the text.
Yes.
On secularism, in fact, we are Indian perspective I'm talking about. I will not go to the Treaty of Westphalia and Western perspective. That's a different story. But so far as India is concerned, we all know that 14th August 1947, Pakistan became independent, and Mr. Jinnah declared that Pakistan will become a religious Islamic country, kind of a thing. And then after a few hours, when India got independence, Nehru had said that India will become a secular country.
Yes, yes.
That was it. That was a very difficult time indeed. And I'm not questioning Nehru's decision about it, because he had to take some decisions very quickly. And because of his liberal education and everything else, he took up this kind of a decision. But then there was a constituent assembly in which this issue was raised, whether secularism should be added in the Indian constitution, because it was proposed by K.D. Shah, and then Loknath Mishra and N.C. Mukherjee and Jawaharlal Nehru, Ambedkar, and they all had debated on these issues, and they all said that there is no need for secularism to be put in our constitution, because we are already not a religious state, we are dharma kind of an state, and dharma means some kind of duty-centric approach, and there is a lot of flexibility, plurality, and everything else which is prevailing therein. In fact, in the emblem of the Supreme Court, it is written, Yado dharma tado jaya. So wherever there is dharma, there is a kind of a thing. And behind the seat of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, it is written that dharma chakra pravartanaya. So the kind of ethics, code of conduct which are prevailing there, so how to go into the modifications of it, and then how that thing modifies us. That idea is there. But in 1976, this thing was introduced, secular term, during emergency, without any debate and discussion kind of a thing. But we did not go to the secularization. It became some kind of panth nirpeksh kind of idea. And it is still prevailing, and many people say that secularism is a redundant, pseudo-secularism and everything started coming up. That is very longish one. So the other thing is about interpretation, which we generally have 4 or 5 models of interpretation. One, that we go into the intentionality of the author and try to find out what exactly does he mean by it. So, and then we try to give an interpretation, because the original author is not there, original artist is also not there. The other thing, people say that, look, who is author? Author is simply a scripter, and he has given us the text. Original reader is also not there. So the audience is also not there. We are the readers, we are born, author is dead, reader is born, but then there are various implications of it. Because if it goes into the terrorist's hands, they will try to interpret the text the way they like it. Because the original author is not there, original audience is not there, there is no check and balance. So this may happen. Or we can take a Kadama's position where a text has some kind of, what is called horizon. Horizon in terms of its language, its culture, its similarities, familiarities, and strangenesses, and we are constantly trying to overcome about it. Or the way Retd says that, that if I go to the West, it will become very longest one. But he said that interpretational language is a kind of a revenge of language in philosophy. Deconstruction becomes a revenge of language in philosophy. So various models are there, but the power concept, Foucauldian model, something like panopticism by Foucault and the history of sexuality, and in the panopticism,
the most important question is power. Yeah, the most important. Yes,
when the power comes into the play with various indicators of it, like the economy, like technology, like diplomacy, military, war, and various factors are there. And they play a very important role in keeping the meaning aspect of it. So the powerful defines it. Even Marx has also said that the rulers' ideas become the dominant ideas in the society. They have refused on exceptionalism. Machiavelli has done the same. Hegel also talked about master-slave dialectics. The power narratives are there. So maybe the next discourse could be on power only.
Yes,
power. If you can think of it, because you are the one who takes up these challenges. So,
thank you very much, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Sir, Tapan.
Sir, we have to conclude, sir.
Yes. If there is,
Okay.
আপনি একটু বলে দিন দু এক কথা, তারপর আমি যাবো।
Okay, so I thank all the two speakers on this occasion. They have elaborated different dimensions of the issues, though the formulation may be wrong, but it has raised some issues that are very important. And with the ball rolling, now we try to take one single item to discuss all these things. I thank you from my heart to Professor Debnarayan Modak, my once colleague and my friend philosopher, and in context of political philosophy, and also our sir, Professor Raghavendra Pratap Singh. He has joined from JNU. We are very grateful to you. I am very thankful and grateful to you for joining us. Now it is to Tapong.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I have just enjoyed both the lectures and the role of the moderator played by my sir. And it's really a good topic to discuss, and the discussion has already made by our speakers is very good, enjoyable, and enlightening. We are in the age of sophisticated, not only sophisticated, but also sophisticated. On the other hand, digitalization is there and sophistication is there. So, joining the two words, I can say that sophisticated world. We are in the age of a sophisticated age. So, we can claim that we are post-modern. But when we behave with others without sympathy, empathy, with antipathy, in case of religion, in case of other social issues, I think we enter into the world of pre-modern. And when we behave with others in sympathetic way, we enter into the world of modern. I think I am not in the state to designate the Indian society, contemporary Indian society, to place it either or, but we can say that in a comprehensive manner, that like Sattva, Rajo, Tamo, all the gunas are there in a man, in a human being, though he is called Brahmano, Vaishyo, Kshatriyo, etc. and etc. In the same way, all these things are there in Indian, contemporary Indian society. And if we think that we are post-modern, it is our only mental satisfaction, but the reality is different from this aspect. So, with these words, I request our Vice President, Dr. Vivekananda Saha, to offer vote of thanks. Vivekananda.
Om Shavanavavatu Shavanavu Gunaktu Sahavirjam Karavavahi Tejasvina Budhitamastu Ma Vidvisavahi Sarvesvantu Niramaya Sarveshubhino Santu Sarve Bhadrani Vasantu Ma Kuschit Dukama Bhave. Respected Professor Satyajit Saha, Dean Faculty of Science, Vidyasagar University. Respected Professor Santosh, Department of Philosophy, Burdwan University. Respected distinguished speakers, Professor Raghavendra Pratap Singh, Department of Philosophy, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Professor Debnarayan Modak, Department of Political Science, NSOU, Dr. Kumar, Secretary, Vidyasagar University Philosophy Alumni Association, and my honorable VUPAA members and all participants. I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. First and foremost, I thank our well-wisher Dean Professor Satyajit Saha, Faculty of Science, Vidyasagar University, for his inaugural address. I also express my heartfelt thanks to Professor Santosh, Department of Philosophy, Burdwan University, for address by the moderator. I would like to thank our valuable speaker, Professor Raghavendra Pratap Singh, Department of Philosophy, Jawaharlal Nehru University, for making excellent presentations and making this national webinar interesting and meaningful. I would like to thank another valuable speaker, Professor Debnarayan, Department of Political Science, Netaji Subhas Open University, for his valuable and excellent presentations. My heartfelt thanks to our beloved Dr. Kumar, Secretary VUPAA and Professor Department of Philosophy and Dean Faculty of Arts and Commerce for introduction of the theme of the webinar and welcome address. Also, his able guidance has always encouraged us. I am happy to express vote of thanks to Dr. Kanti, Head Department of Philosophy, Palpada Jogata Satsanga Mahavidyalaya, Sheikh Amirul Haq, State Retd College Teacher, Panjmura Mahavidyalaya, Professor Anjan Kumar Mondol, Assistant Professor of Philosophy, Lalgod Government College, Uttam Dolai, Assistant Teacher of Philosophy, and Biplab Bari, Guest Teacher, Vidyasagar Teachers Training College, for overall technical support of his webinar. My heartfelt thanks to all VUPAA members for their valuable contribution, guidance, and encouragement in all our efforts. I thank all the distinguished invitees from all over the India present at this webinar. Finally, the wonderful students who have turned up in such great numbers, thank you so much for your presence and cooperation. Once again, I thank all for your cordial cooperation. Thank you so much, everyone.
So with this, we conclude the webinar. Pretty much once again, thank you, and hope we will be joining in some other occasion. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.